also be recorded. Again, please put yourself on mute if you just joined us. Next slide, please. So we're here today for a couple reasons. One, for the agencies, Department of Natural Resources, Department of Fish and Wildlife, to share information about current e-bike policies on the lands that they manage, as well as, and importantly, to hear from you and to collect input on the use of e-bikes, if e-bikes should be allowed on DNR, DFW managed non-motorized trails, roads closed to vehicle traffic, and all of the lands that they manage. And importantly, also, if and which of the three classes should be allowed. So again, today we're talking about DNR and DFW managed lands, and I want to make that distinction. We're not talking about local government managed paved trails, state park trails, or federal lands, Forest Service, Park Service, federally designated wilderness. We're talking about DNR and DFW managed lands. Next slide, please. For the agenda today, we're going to talk for the first 25 minutes or so. The agencies will have a presentation to give to you all, and I'll cover some logistical items. And then we're going to transition to 4 breakout groups so we can hear from you, collect as much input as possible on a digital whiteboard, and then we'll reconvene for the final 15 minutes of today's meeting to review next steps for the 2 agencies, review different opportunities to provide public input as part of this process, and we're going to wrap up today's meeting by 2 o'clock. Next slide, please. So we're using the Zoom meeting platform today. I'm sure many of you have become quite familiar with this platform over the last 2 years, but there's a couple different web meeting platforms out there. So I always have to remind myself which one I'm on and where all the tools are. So just a quick reminder, the mute button is on your far left bottom of the screen. That's an important one. Again, just please stay on mute if you're not talking. The chat function, which you can click on, is in the middle of the screen, and that is actually open for public use today. However, we do ask that you are respectful of others in your use of the chat, and a reminder that the chat is, or the meeting today is being recorded, and so that chat will be made publicly viewable now and in the future. So please be respectful of your use of the chat. I'm also going to ask that if you're using the chat in the first part of the meeting, please reserve that for any just technical questions about the meeting itself or logistics regarding the process. Once we get to breakout groups, if you have comments or questions, feel free to use the chat in the breakout groups. However, we have a wonderful turnout today, and our facilitators are going to prioritize verbal comments, and if we need to, we'll get back to you on questions in the chat as appropriate and as we are able. The other tool to know is the raise your hand feature, which is in the bottom right of your screen. If you can find the reactions button, the small smiley face, and click on that, there's a raise your hand function. I'll ask one of my colleagues just to show that, and then lower your hand. When we get to the breakout groups, please raise your hand if you'd like to speak, and our facilitators will call on you at that point. If you have any technical questions, go ahead and email my colleague, Anna Shepard. I'll ask my colleague, Lucila, to put Anna's email in the chat for you now. And also, if it's helpful, closed captioning is available if you click the CC button at the bottom of your screen. So next steps, please. Or next slide, please. A few ground rules for today. Again, we really appreciate you being here. We have great turnout, and please participate. There's no wrong answers. When providing input verbally or in the chat, please try and be constructive, civil, and respectful. And please share the time. Again, we have a large group, so please share the time with your fellow meeting participants today. Keep your comments brief as you're able. And then speak to your own experiences, please. Please use I statements, I think, I've experienced, rather than speaking for other user groups that you might find out on the trail. And lastly, it's our commitment to you as the facilitators to really try and work to set this meeting up to hear from as many as possible. And so that might mean at times we have to keep the conversation moving. Sometimes we have to use our interrupter badge, but there are many other ways to participate and provide more information beyond this meeting to the agencies, and we'll cover those in a little bit. So we go to the next slide. We want to start with a little icebreaker, if you will, to practice using the chat and help get our minds thinking constructively about what we value or what you value about recreation on state-managed trails and lands. So I'm going to ask you to find the chat function at the bottom of your screen, click that and open it up, and type 3 words in the chat in response to this question. Again, no right or wrong answers. The question is, what makes for a positive trail or public lands experience for you? So go ahead and type 2, 3 words if you'd like in the chat, and I'll review those and read a few out, and then we're going to circle back on this prompt in a little bit. So I'm seeing good company, having fun, condition, friendly, smiling, beauty, clean, safe, access, quiet, public access, friendliness, solitude, friendship, health, natural beauty. So a lot of values. And I want you to think about what interests you have today in recreation on public lands. I think that's a good place to start as we are going to talk about how e-bikes may or may not fit and how on state managed trails. So we'll come back to those comments. Thank you for providing those. And I think we could go to the next slide. I'm going to turn the floor over to the DNR and DFW teams for some presentation and background information.
Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Andrea Martin. I'm the statewide recreation manager for the Department of Natural Resources. I am going to just give a quick overview of the legislation that brought us here today, and then I'll pass it over to my colleague Heidi at the Department of Fish and Wildlife. Thank you all for taking time to engage with us today. I really appreciate you being here, and looking forward to hearing what you have to share. So in the 2021 legislative session, Senate Bill 5452 was passed into law. And so you see a portion of the bill language here on the screen. So the bill does a couple things. First, it requires DNR and DFW to undergo this public process to collect information about e-bike access on non-motorized natural surface trails and roads that are closed to motorized use. So both of our agencies manage road systems. Some allow motorized access, some allow non-motorized access, and allow hiking and bicycling. And so part of this process is to look at both trails and roads that allow traditional non-electric bicycles and get feedback on if and where electric assisted bicycles should be allowed. So that's what the process we're doing today, or that's underway. We are also instructed to engage a variety of specific user groups in the process. And I think Thomas is going to talk in more detail about how all of these groups are being engaged, but we are required to include input from tribes, individuals with disabilities, representatives of conservation organizations, and then also representatives of a variety of outdoor recreation interests, including horseback riding, both traditional and electric, or an e-bike, biking, hiking, and hunting. And so we have a pretty robust public engagement process to help us meet the requirements of this legislation. The finding or the deliverable that we are required to create out of this is a report to the legislature that is due at the end of September. That will be a summary of all of the feedback that we've received from the public meetings and other opportunities for feedback. And that report will be used to help us in future policy creation processes, but this process will not result in any new e-bike policy. This is an opportunity to share and hear the feedback. So I just want to be clear on that. I think next slide, and I'll just talk about the kind of final piece of the legislation. So this is an infographic of current e-bike access rules. And so this is also included in that Senate Bill 5452 language. So starting this last summer, both DNR and DFW are required to allow both Class 1 and Class 2 e-bikes to be ridden on our soft surface trails that allow bikes, at roads that allow bikes, if the rider has an ADA placard. And so this is a requirement of the legislation. Neither of our agencies are allowing Class 3 e-bikes in either trails or roads currently per the legislation. And this current rule does expire at the end of this biennium in July of 2023, or end of June of 2023, if we don't create new policy before that time. So just wanted to be clear that this is another piece of the legislation, is this expanded access. It's likely not permanent, and that our agencies will be working to create probably different policy based on this public engagement process. So that's all I have to share, and I'll pass it over to Heidi Anderson.
Can I interject for a second? I'm on phone.
Go ahead and introduce yourself. You can keep it brief. We're not going to cover questions.
My name is Bruce Barnes, and I would like them to explain why this bill came up, because this bill was because of me, and who the senator was that wrote this bill, which was Annette Cleveland.
Okay.
For everybody that is in the audience.
Thank you, Bruce. I'll ask the team to explain that, and then we'll cover questions later and follow up with questions after this meeting as we're able. So thank you, Bruce. Andrea or Heidi, is that something you can speak to briefly?
Sure, I'll just briefly mention, yeah, Senator Cleveland was the prime sponsor on the bill that I just mentioned, Senate Bill 5452, and it was the result of constituent request, including Bruce, who just spoke up, who brought the idea for the bill forward and worked with Senator Cleveland to get the access that the bill allows now. So I'll just say that super briefly, and I'm sure Bruce can mention more at the focus group or at the breakout room that he's in if he'd like to.
Thank you, Andrea. Go ahead, Heidi.
Okay, next slide. Just to review the e-bike classifications, the 3 classes of e-bikes that are considered non-motorized by the state of Washington. Class 1 is a bicycle that has a motor that assists only when you're pedaling, and that motor will only assist up until you reach a speed of 20 miles per hour. So it is a pedal assist with the assist maxing out at 20 miles per hour. Class 2 is a bike that has a motor that can be used exclusively. So it has a throttle. Again, that motor will only assist up to 20 miles per hour, but does not require pedaling. Class 3 does require pedaling, but the motor will only assist up to 28 miles per hour. And it does have a speedometer. Okay, next slide. So just to give some context, these are some sample policies of some other public lands and how they're managing e-bikes. Most recently, the Forest Service has come out with their final policy, And that is that all classes of e-bikes will be allowed on motorized roads and trails, but they're going to leave it to a public process to determine the most appropriate use for particular areas. But they also, it's important to note that they also still consider e-bikes a motorized use. Under the Department of Interior, e-bikes are allowed anywhere other bikes are allowed, and prohibited where other bikes are prohibited. And with the caveat that a local manager from either any of those agencies can decide for their area where bicycles are just not appropriate. So under Washington State Parks, class 1 and 3 are allowed on long distance and regional trails and any natural surface trails that are open to other traditional bikes. And for Oregon State Parks, it's kind of interesting. E-bikes are allowed on trails that are 8 feet or wider. And the local managers can decide for trails that are more narrow than the 8 feet on a case-by-case basis. And they are also under a process of reviewing their policy right now. Okay, next slide.
Thanks, Heidi. So as Heidi and Andrea both mentioned, the result of this process per the legislation is a report back to the legislature from DNR and WDFW. And so there are a number of different work streams, if you will, that are going to feed into that report of information to the legislature. In the middle, turquoise green is the public process, this public engagement process that this town hall is part of. The agencies are also, to the left of that, implementing e-bike pilot programs in specific areas of the state. The agencies are also performing a literature review of what is known best available science about e-bike and recreation impacts, as well as policies in other parts of the country, other jurisdictions, similar to what Heidi just mentioned. And then the agencies, as Andrea mentioned, are engaging with the tribes as co-managers in a separate process in respect to tribal sovereignty. And that all together will feed into the report on what was heard and what was found by these agencies back to the legislature. And so that is just a reminder, as Andrea mentioned, that report is not going to be a policy recommendation specifically. So go to the next slide. There are multiple ways to engage in this public process. This is the first of 2 town halls, and the core of this public engagement process is really these 2 public town halls. The next is next Wednesday at 5:30 p.m., also on Zoom. The other is a public survey. The public survey is available online, and my colleague Lucila will put links to it in the chat here in a moment. That survey is available in Spanish, it is available in English, and it is also available as a paper copy if you or other members of the public are not able to fill it out online. And that can be found a paper copy can be procured by calling the agency offices, regional or in Olympia. There are also, as was mentioned, a couple other ways this public engagement process is really collecting input from the key interest groups outlined in the legislation. That includes a focus group made up of organizations that represent those recreation user groups, hikers, hunters, conservation, e-biking, traditional biking, and including some retail interests as well. And then targeted listening sessions with those different user groups broken up more specifically with the agencies. There's also a specific targeted listening session for equity-focused recreation groups and a targeted listening session for the adaptive recreation community or the disabled recreation community. So multiple ways to engage. And if you can go to the next slide, you can send emails, comments, or questions to these 2 DNR and DFW email addresses. And my colleague Lucila will put those in the chat if you want to mark those down. And I'll just note, for today's meeting, I'm looking at the list here. We have probably about 100 public participants and really appreciate that. Our goal here today is to try and hear from as many of you as possible, but the meeting today is just not set up to hold kind of a deep dialogue. So if you're left with questions or comments after today's meeting, please send those on to the agencies, and the agencies will respond as appropriate and as they are able. So before we move to the public input part of this meeting, I want to circle back to the icebreaker and ask my colleague Claire just to bring up a word cloud of the input that you provided in the chat. And we did our best to collect all your input in the chat a few minutes ago. We may not have captured it all, but we'll do so after this meeting to include in the public summary that will go online with the recording. So I'm seeing access right front and center is a key value for all of you. Clean, solitude, safety, safe, two forms of safety, accessible, condition, fun, friendliness, many values, and they're all important to you all in your own ways. And we just wanted to bring this word cloud up to help center you in your interests with regard to recreation before jumping into the public input process. So I'll cover a few logistics and then we're going to go out into breakout rooms. So if we can go back to the slides, Claire. And I'm just going to respond to a chat or a question I see in the chat here. Triangle Associates is a neutral third-party public involvement firm. We're based here in the Northwest, and we are the consultants helping DNR and WDFW collect as much information from you all to inform that report to the legislature and their future decision making. So we can go to the next slide. So we're going to, as I've mentioned, we're going to go into breakout groups, and there are 3 prompts for discussion today. Those questions include, under what circumstances, if any, should e-bikes be allowed on non-motorized trails or closed roads on lands managed by DNR and WDFW? And which of the 3 classes may be allowable? So there's a few variables there. There's also a third question. What opportunities, challenges, or concerns should be considered regarding e-bike use on non-motorized trails and closed roads managed by these agencies, DNR and DFW? So again, as you think about your responses, whether you're going to raise your hand, provide input, or make comments in the chat, please try and be constructive, speak to your own experiences, and ask that you share the time. So go to the next slide. I'll just cover a few logistics. Each breakout room is going to have a facilitator and a note taker to capture your input on a whiteboard live today. And please raise your hand if you'd like to speak out loud. That will help the facilitator know to call on you. And again, the raise your hand function will be at the bottom of your screen. Find the little reactions button with the smiley face. Your facilitator will help you find that in your breakout room. And we're going to return to plenary session to the full group at 1:45. So we'll have about 45 minutes, a little more together. So to get into breakout groups, my colleague Anna has spread us out evenly across the 4 groups. And in a moment, when I ask her to, you'll see a dialog box pop up on your screen. And then that will invite you to join the group. At that point, you'll click yes to join, and we'll take a few minutes to land in our groups. And then Anna is going to stay in the main room to help anybody who somehow didn't make it into a group find a group to participate in. Just a note that the breakout groups are also being recorded. And if you have any questions, go ahead and put those in the chat. We're going to try and get to those if we're able. But again, we're prioritizing your input as much as possible today. So Anna, if you want to send us into breakout groups, we'll see you all back here at 1:45. So go ahead and click the join button to join the group as you're invited.
Hello.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hello.
Well, welcome to group one.
I would like
Is that
group one.
was that Bruce that wanted to chat?
Yes. Yes, sir. I'm in group one. Yep. I'm gonna have to leave mine unmuted because I don't have a way to raise my hand because I'm just on my phone.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry I missed that. There's a way to do that, *9, but yeah, go ahead and leave yourself unmuted for the moment. We're just going to let everybody find their group, and then Bruce, maybe we come to you first because I think you had a comment. Again, welcome everybody. This is group one. We have about 45 minutes together. My colleague Annalise and I are here to listen to you and to take notes. And I do believe we have Aaron from WDFW as well to listen to you. We want to have a good conversation today. Again, the goal is really to hear from you as much as possible. Aaron may be able to respond to some questions if they come up. But again, the agencies may just have to take note and get back to you depending on that question. So Annalise, I think we can pull up the whiteboard.
Moment. I need to be able to screen share. 1 second. Let me message Claire.
Okay. Give us a moment here. Annalise, I think while we're waiting for the screen share, what I'll just ask you to do is start taking notes. And so for those who are all here, we're going to start taking notes and we'll get that up on the screen in just a moment. So I want to make sure that we can hear from as many folks as possible. I don't want to delay. So Bruce, do you want to provide a couple comments or some input on the questions about where e-bikes may be allowable or not in which of the 3 classes?
Well, in my opinion, I don't see any harm in any of these things. One of the things that I cherish myself is my public lands, and I've spent a lifetime of 57 years being out in those public lands, not only with my grandfather, my father, and my sons, but a lot of my friends as well, right? And it just seems more and more and more our public lands are being locked up and the rules are being dictated by agencies instead of the state legislation, the Ways and Means Committee, or our state senators. And that's why I went to my state senator, I'm very thankful for, Annette Cleveland, to get this rules and this situation drafted up because I was severely discriminated against as a disabled hunter. And it frustrated me to the point where this was my only outlet, was to have her draft up a bill to get to this procedure. And to me, I see no harm in riding a bicycle as a disabled hunter, or anybody for that matter, because age is a disability as well. And riding a bicycle on a surface that's built for a log truck, my question would be, is what does more damage, the logging and the destruction of the atmosphere in that clear cut and all the silt that goes down the river bottoms, and then all the fisheries that are affected by all the chemicals that are then sprayed all over the timberlands? Or is it me just wanting to go out and breathe some fresh air and get away from people and go and enjoy all the sights and sounds of nature and see all the beautiful views that are locked up to most people? You know, there's a lot of elderly people, including my dad, that can't even go anywhere anymore because all these gates are locked up now. Everything is on lockdown except for the main line. And then if you want to go see some places in the Northwest, you know, 75% of the timberlands are owned by Weyerhaeuser Timber Company, and it costs $400 and some change to get on their land. But you've also, the person that's with you has to have one of those passes, and they don't recognize disabled hunters. And our state doesn't really recognize disabled hunters as well, because there's not many places that they have access to go hunt. You know what I mean? And go out and
Yeah.
enjoy the outdoors. So that's why I researched these bicycles. I asked the agencies if these were allowed. They said yes. I asked the Forest Service. They said yes. So then I went and purchased these bicycles for my son and I, which was the tune of $16,000. So I've got a massive investment for my outdoor activities, so I can go and enjoy my outdoor activities, and then only to be told, no, you can't do this, even though the state law says a class 1, class 2, and class 3 bicycle are considered bicycle and non-motorized by the state of Washington's lawmakers, which is obviously the Supreme Court, the
Bruce,
Attorney General, the governor who signed the bill.
Bruce, can I reflect what I'm hearing from you and a few things? Just, I know you don't, so we have a whiteboard up, and I just want to reflect
Yes,
for
sir.
our note taker on what we're hearing from you. One is you'd like to see access for all 3 classes of the e-bikes on state managed lands.
Yes,
and
sir.
why is particularly around interest for disabled hunters in particular. And you'd like to also
disabled people, period.
Disabled people, period. So we're capturing that. And you'd really like to see this decision made by the legislature rather than the agencies. You'd like to see the elected officials make decisions like this. Those are kind of 3 points that we're putting on the whiteboard. Does that sound right to you?
Absolutely. And the fourth thing I wanted to touch on is I've gone all over the country. In the most liberal place in America, which is California, you can go down to Mammoth Lakes, California, and ride your bicycles all over the Mammoth Mountain down there. They embrace it. And at any point of the week, you'll see over $3 million of mountain bikes, which is bringing revenue into these rural communities that are dying in our communities. And they desperately need this revenue from people to come and buy food and groceries and hotels and gasoline and everything else to support these local economies, and the bicycle shops that sell these bikes. Thank you,
Bruce. So I'm hearing the importance of e-bikes as part of a recreation tourism economy, particularly for rural communities. We have that on the whiteboard here. If I can, Bruce, I'd like to go to a few other folks. We have a few other hands up.
Absolutely. Thank you for allowing me to speak, sir.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here. So I see Judy and then Anna and Randall. I'm going to go to Judy first, and I'll keep track of the cues. So Judy.
Hi, thank you. I'm an e-bike rider. I ride a class 1 and I ride a class 3 bike. They're both pedal assist, and I've been following this issue for probably 5 years. It seems to me all 3 classes of e-bikes should be allowed on non-motorized trails and closed roads on lands managed by DNR WDFW. I think the research shows that these bikes don't cause any more damage than other bikes. Of course, it depends on the weight of the bike plus the rider. So it's not something that can be pinned down specifically as damage caused by the bike. I've seen research over the last several years that supports that. I think all 3 classes should be allowed. I think it's an accessibility issue for people. It allows people to get out into the woods and experience, have more nature. I believe there is community pressure from people who don't ride e-bikes because they don't understand that the e-bike is not a dangerous thing. It's not a motorcycle. And I think there's confusion in the public about that. The challenges are anytime you increase a user group into a public space, and I'm involved in stewarding parks here where we live, there are more people in the woods, more people on the trails. Is that a bad thing for a public park? Probably not, but it's something that needs to be managed. And one way I think that successfully manages that, besides education and understanding who should have right of way in certain situations between pedestrians, horses, bikes, is to establish some speed limits, and where it doesn't make a difference if you're riding a class 1 or a class 3. If there is a speed limit and you follow the rules, then that would be probably successful. And it should be either at 15 or 20. I think 20 is excessive, but a lot of mountain bikers ride at 20 without any e-support. I want to thank you for having this meeting,
Yeah.
and I appreciate the opportunity to talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Judy. I'll reflect what we've captured here. You're wanting to see all the e-bike classes out on the lands, but noted some of the considerations around speed as a concern, and then also management of recreation, just increased recreation in general. So appreciate that. I'm going to go to Anna next, and I'll ask folks to lower their hand. Judy, I just lowered yours. And again, we have a nice queue here, so just if you can be succinct, really appreciate that. So Anna, you're up.
Hi, thank you for allowing me some time to chat with you today. I am an e-bike rider, but I also ride acoustic mountain bikes, so I see both sides. I'm all for class 1 being permitted. Class 2 starts to concern me as it has a throttle. That starts getting into that gray area of, is it a motorcycle? Is it not? I have a concern with the speed limit. I know acoustic bikes can go pretty darn fast. I have a concern with the class 3 bikes going fast as well. So I really see just an overall issue with speed limit, whether it's acoustic or assist of any sort. I also have a concern over fire danger with anything electric. When we start hitting wildfire precautions, I'd like to see some rules surrounding that, right? If I can't operate my electric chainsaw out in the woods, I don't, there's just some concern there. As far as weight, I know that that's been touched on. Whether it's a 20-pound acoustic bike or a 50-pound electric bike, it doesn't really matter. It's, you've got different weighted riders too. So I don't think weight really comes into play necessarily. And those are sort of the notes I made, but I really would like to see at least class 1 permitted on WDFW lands as well as DNR.
Thank you, Anna. Hearing at least class 1 and some considerations there. I just want to highlight for Annalise here, the note taker, we can note that there are limitations on electric chainsaws related to industrial fire protection regulations in the summer. And what about that with regard to e-bikes? So thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
Randall, you're up next.
Hey, thanks for this opportunity. Yeah, I represent the Backcountry Horsemen of America. We've got about 3 dozen chapters in Washington State, and you're going to get a variety of opinions on this issue. But let me tell you from the national perspective, and I know this is shared widely within Washington. E-bikes are a wonderful thing. They're going to provide opportunities for many people to get outdoors who wouldn't otherwise without the motorized assist. We need people to enjoy their public lands, state lands, and give back in terms of, volunteerism and creating trail. Just want to, and especially with the adaptive community, the disabled things, I, could not make an argument against that whatsoever. That's a key consideration for allowing e-bikes in many places. Let me just talk about the folks that aren't part of the adaptive community then, and my personal opinions on e-bikes on non-motorized trails. So we're talking natural surface, non-motorized trails. It's really more of a question to, consider. When do the non-motorized users, at what point does it cut off in terms of what new technologies keep coming that we have to accommodate on traditional trails shared by hikers, horsemen, mountain bikers, hunters, bird watchers, etc. I think there's a point, and we're almost there at that inflection point of too much access. And so I would make the argument that for the most part, irrespective, forgetting for a moment the adaptive community and their specific needs, that any class of electric motorized bicycle is not appropriate on non-motorized trails. Now, that doesn't mean, roads are a different issue, fire roads, etc., from DNR and state agencies. But I really want to put it out there as, hikers, horsemen, others have given a lot and taken a lot. And as we crowd trails, especially with potentially faster moving vehicles, there's a huge safety concern for equestrians. And hopefully those reasons are obvious, but, we're already having, suffice to say, challenges with mountain biking in several places, but a lot of good partnerships and a lot of good working, with mountain bike groups. Adding the e-bike element to it too, I think is going to tip the scale. to a point of no return. And then, of course, it begs a question: class 1, 2, 3, anything beyond that, because we know there's plenty of workarounds and hacks you can find on YouTube for how to hack an e-bike. So the safety is a paramount concern to us in finding that appropriate set of trails. But I would almost go so far as to say there shouldn't be an allowance on non-motorized trails, say for the adaptive community, because of those changing technologies and what else is going to come next. Do want to say, though, lastly, that the Federal Highways Administration, their Volpe Center in Vancouver, Washington, is currently studying a variety of issues about the economic and social impacts of e-bike use on trails, in this case, public land trails. And there is no consensus on their environmental impact, their safety impacts, or social impacts. There is no solid science yet on that, and that's what this recent report from the Volpe Center has stated. So with the lack of that kind of information, I would hope folks would be, land managers would be in DNR and elsewhere, would be very hesitant to authorize e-bike use on, natural surface trails for those reasons.
So Randall, just one follow-up. Can you put in the chat the name of that organization that is doing that work, just so we capture that in the notes?
You bet.
That's helpful. And I think what I heard from you is the recommendation is to not have e-bikes on non-motorized trails because of the technology question of where's the limit then, but that there should be opportunities for people to ride e-bikes on public lands. Is that a fair summation?
Absolutely. And if that's, shared use with on motorized single track trails, or there's really a responsibility for industry and the manufacturer of these e-bikes to create trail systems specifically for e-bike use. Because even in the limited studies, there are environmental impacts that are not peer reviewed. There's clearly a connection between, turns and acceleration and uphill and the impacts that could be quite different than how trails are designed now. So, having the manufacturers and bicycle associations actually support and develop trail systems specifically for this use would be ideal. They need to be responsible for the machinery they're selling and be good stewards and saying, we're not going to leave the agencies, state and federal, hanging and having to make tough decisions on their own. We're going to be part of that mix, would be what I recommend.
Thank you. So see a few more hands up, but I'll just note another prompt question here to think about is the agencies are making a distinction between, as Randall just did, non-motorized trails, and then also the roads that are out there, two-track type roads that are closed to vehicle traffic. So if you're someone that has concerns about e-bike use on trails or any of the classes, I think it would be helpful to know if those concerns remain the same on those closed roads, and we'll capture those notes if you want to add to that. But I see Scott, your hand up is next.
Hi, thanks for this opportunity in the meeting. I live in Bellingham, Washington, which is kind of a mountain bike mecca here. And I also ride both acoustic and EMTBs. I actually agree with Anna on a lot of her points. I find that e-bikes allow me to ride when I have limited time. I'm not in any way disabled, but they still provide a lot of advantages to me. For example, after work, I can go out and do several laps that I would not be able to do on an acoustic. I can ride more and longer periods of time and go further and go to higher places on the mountain that I wouldn't otherwise be able to. So I find that to be an advantage. And then also I'm biking to most trailheads. I'm not driving. So I'm actually saving on parking spaces and gas because I'm able to access the trails within a larger radius of my home just by biking. So I find those to be some additional advantages just for the average user. For the first question, so I basically believe that e-bikes should be allowed and anywhere that a bicycle should be allowed, with class 1 primarily being treated as a bicycle and class 2 and 3 being more on a case-by-case basis, just because I don't really understand how a throttle would impact use. And 28 miles per hour does seem pretty fast to, like, say, come up on a hiker. So that'd be more case by case. Maybe based on trail usage, but I do think class 1 is I don't see any difference between class 1 e-bikers and regular acoustic bikers up on the hills, at least where I primarily ride. Downhill is no faster on an e-bike than it is on an acoustic. You're going the same speed. Everything's pretty much the same. Really, it's just the climbing where you see a significant increase in speed. Let's see what other, oh yeah, challenges. What I would like to see is some published e-bike guidelines at trailheads, something to make it clear of, what good biking etiquette would be. I know there's, just like with any new sport, there's going to need to be some training, some accountability for people. There's guidelines posted for bikers. Maybe there should be separate guidelines for e-bikes as well. So I think that could be a challenge. I can't imagine there's an additional fire danger with e-bikes, but it would be good to confirm that. I think the issue with chainsaws is they cause friction. If the chain hits a rock, it can cause a spark. That's where the danger of that comes from, not from the electricity itself. That's my understanding from being a forest ranger on that anyways. So anyway, those are some of my ideas and thoughts. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. Yeah, so hearing that distinction that class 1 and 2, well, class 1 is very similar to a normal, I think was the term analog or acoustic.
Acoustic, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Acoustic e-bike, or excuse me, acoustic mountain bike. Class 2 also goes 20 miles an hour. So from a speed perspective, there's no difference there. And class 3, the difference there is the speed, and there's a key distinction. Thank you, Scott. So Greg, your hand is up, and then there are a few others who may have lowered their hands, but Greg, we'll go to you next.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, I'm coming at this from a Washingtonian of 5 generations, and as a hunter, a logger, fisherman, I just see this as another way to exploit an already situation with our big game that's been at a disadvantage for a long time. People are going to get in the backcountry while the animals are I'm 54. I've hunted in the backcountry whole life. That don't guarantee me or give me a way that I should be able to do that till I'm 80 just for the exploitation of animals. I'm in no agreement with having any more exploitation of any type of these e-bikes. We go in the backcountry for the experience, and more human activity decreases that great experience. The challenges I see are, how are they going to enforce this? I don't see any way that the resources that the state, WDFW have right now, that could even possibly remotely put officers at these locations to enforce any type of, whether it's going to be a misdemeanor or how are they going to check if it's a class 1 or a class 3. So I just see a lot of conflict there with people who use the old-fashioned method. They use their feet with a pair of boots, versus these people that I feel like would like to get back into places that traditionally 40, 50 years ago you primarily did on your own physical ability. So again, I just don't like to see the resources of our animals being exploited.
Thank you, Greg. I think 3 concerns, and I just want to make sure we capture those. One is enforcement. How do you do that with all the different classes out there? The experience and the potential for e-bikes to change the backcountry experience, particularly from a hunting perspective. And then also speaking from a hunting or wildlife perspective, a concern that it would result in increased hunting pressure on wildlife. Does that sound right to you, Greg?
That's right. And I'm a hunter, but I'm a conservationist and an environmentalist ahead of that. And you're talking to a guy that's hunted since he's been old enough to walk. And I just see our big game with this technology taking a big a disadvantage. One other thing I want to bring up,
Sure.
the segregation of this is from the low income. A lower income family or person can't afford one of these e-bikes, but they sure can't afford a pair of boots. And I see this being a higher income bracket recreational activity that again exploits animals that from the last time I checked are still four-legged or from the same way they were 100 years ago. So that's my comments. Thanks for allowing me to talk.
Absolutely, Greg. Thank you. We captured that in the economic concerns, accessibility concerns with regard to e-bikes and recreation on public lands. Chaz, your hand is up, and I've noticed, Chaz, you put a few comments in the chat. So you want to just let us know what you put in the chat, what your thoughts are on these questions. And you're on mute, Chaz.
There we go. Hey, hello everyone. This is Chaz with Baby Boomer Bikes. I'm actually a retailer of e-bikes. All right, so I've had a little bit of exposure for about 7 years with it. I'm coming from Germany. We're about a decade plus behind on things that we're talking about right now. The Europeans overall have, introduced, accepted e-bikes as a normal bike. Listening to the last gentleman speak, I do sell fat tire bikes that that guys use for hunting. I have probably in 7 years sold on that particular model about 15, right? And only 2 out of 15 are like really true hunters. A lot of them use it for on the beach, and they like it. It's kind of a cool ride. I am an advocate for class 1, class 2 e-bikes on all the trails and stuff, especially on the mountain bikes and stuff. They got a 3.5-inch tire. I'm actually going to Amsterdam this week to talk to a manufacturer at making a mid-drive torque sensor e-bike. It's a 29er mountain bike for retail purposes. The price point on the bikes can vary. It's kind of like you get what you pay for. But I appreciate the opportunity to participate in this. When I first got here from Germany, I had a bicycle coffee shop, and I set up the meeting with the city mayor, city council, a few other folks. I'm in between Portland and Seattle. I gave a presentation of what was existing at that time as far as what is an e-bike and all the classes and stuff. And I said, hey, let's be proactive with our trails here because it's not if, it's just when somebody has an accident with an e-bike, right? I don't want you guys to call Seattle or call Portland and say, hey, what do you guys do? They were real responsive about that. A few months later, they called me up and said, hey, we just got a grant to improve our bike lanes and our sidewalks. And since you seem to be spearheading the e-bike side, we would like you to join the committee. I did so, turn around, gave my 2 cents. There's things in works now that will allow the e-bikes, because all the science says non-motorized bikes, right, are non-motorized, right? And they assume that they take that for e-bikes, and that's really not the case. So that's slowly getting changed. On the trails that I've seen up in the mountains, everybody seems to be, respectful. I haven't seen any craziness. It's going to happen. You're going to have people. My primary demographics are baby boomers. We seem to be a little more respectful and courteous on trails and stuff. The class 3 is a beast of an e-bike, and there will be people that will push that envelope every time they get on it. So I guess my 2 cents on this right now is, yes, I would like to make sure that the trails are open for class 1, class 2 e-bikes. That's all I have for the group right now. Thank you for letting me chat.
Thanks, Chaz. Just to help with the notes, can you help with the why behind the 1 and 2, just with your reasoning? That helps the agency.
I can't see the top of it on class 1, class 2.
Why class 1 and 2?
Because class 3 really is it's above the 750 watt motor capacity, and it's unrestricted speed, right? Like I said, most people in my age group we're a little more conservative with that, pushing that envelope. Younger folks, you know, have no fear. And the reaction time for a class 3 obviously takes longer than a class 1 or class 2, as far as stopping and reacting. Does it make any sense to you?
It does. It does. Similar to some of the others have mentioned.
Yeah,
Speed
yeah,
is the focus.
absolutely.
Others have expressed concern about the throttle. So right here on the left, you see class 1 and 3. So that's helpful. I just want to pose another question, and then I see Abby's hand up. This is a question for everybody, but Chaz, I'll give you the first shot at it. Some others mentioned the challenge of enforcing or providing information to the public about the different classes and where they may or may not be allowed to be ridden. I think Bruce spoke to that a little bit, having an e-bike, but can't ride it in certain places. So just as you chime in here, additional question is how to share public information about the regulations and educate riders out there about where they can and cannot ride their e-bikes. So another question to throw out. Chaz, do you want to add anything to that? And then we'll go to Abby.
Yeah, if we could do that, mainly with all the signs that we have on the trails, to physically annotate class 1, class 2 authorized. That'd be the biggest. Public announcements. Any literature that the Forest Department puts out. Now, the state law and the federal laws, and I put some links inside the chat group. I know everybody saw that. So the federal law, what they say the e-bikes are, but obviously when it gets to the state side, it could change a little bit. So just kind of get on the same sheet of music on that. So I'll mute and let everybody chime in on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Chaz. And Mary's saying Trail Force does a good job with area descriptions there. So Abby, I think you had a hand up.
Yeah, I just, being an avid mountain biker for the last 10 years or so out here, what you already have up there, I think class 1 and 3 are right. The throttle thing makes me nervous a little bit, especially being on mountain bike trails, or if somebody hits it going downhill. I don't know what kind of safety features there are for that sort of thing. If somebody's going downhill on a mountain bike trail, or for that means on a hiker, biker, and horse trail, it makes me nervous having an actual throttle versus pedal assist would be a little bit easier to manage. If there's a crash or something like that, you're not going to have a throttle of something. I think class 2 is fine if it's adapted sports or disability, but having a placard or some sort of permit of some way, and I think permits in some way for any of the e-bikes could be a possibility as a way to get revenue for the trails and for the forest, as well as know if those people are allowed to have the e-bikes out there. I think I said, yeah, multi-use trail stuff. I don't feel real comfortable with that. I myself stay away from hiker and horse trails just because I know that I've had a horse in the past, and I know it's a safety thing sometimes, and I don't want to scare them, and I don't want to be scared either by that stuff, or have anybody get hurt or have their horse go another direction, or me come up behind somebody. I think that it's a good idea that all e-bikes should have speedometers on them, and that there should be signs on the trails of which ones are allowed. Like, we already have signs for stuff that says, you know, bikers, hikers, horses, or just horses and hikers, or things like that. I think that's a smart addition. But otherwise, yeah, I really feel strongly just about the class 1 and 3 and class 2, unless you have a permit of some sort. I think that's pretty important. And being a little bit younger generation in my 30s, and doing it a lot, I just feel that those things are important, and that there should be some ways to look at continuing to people to enjoy everything, but having some safety concerns around it as well.
So like some others, Abby's concerned about safety features, in particular on the toy itself.
Mm-hmm.
Some good points there. One thing that Anna brought up was multi-use trails, and I wonder if that relates to some of the other comments that have been made, and that maybe multi-use trails aren't the perfect solution for all users as maybe once was thought. I think others talked about e-bikers should have a place to ride their bikes, but not on non-motorized trails. So I'd be curious to know what this group thinks about that. Is multi-use something that needs to be reconsidered? So that's one question for you all. And I would just going to observe a few things in the chat. Anna's saying, please no more permits, but beyond current fees. So we don't have any more hands up. I've seen a lot of comments in the chat, and we will review those after this meeting and include them on the whiteboard. But I'd ask anybody else.
Is there any more time to add anything? I'd like to
we
add
have
something.
about another just short of 15 minutes. Bruce, Nancy hasn't spoken yet, so can I go to her first and then come back?
No, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Bruce.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. I would like to comment on the ADA use.
Okay, great.
I am a physician, specifically with rheumatology. So I have a lot of patients who have a lot of handicaps, but are not ADA. So there's a huge range, and it's not a cut thing. A lot of people have bad knees, but don't want to use a handicap spot. They want to be able to walk as far as they can. I have other time people who gave handicap stickers to that you wouldn't know they were handicapped. They would have problems with maybe losing their finger if the weather got cold. So I wanted them to be able to use a handicap spot when it's freezing outside. So I think it's great that this bill brought up the thing for use, but having something where somebody can use this who has a handicap, but not quite to the ADA level, is going to be real important. When I was in my 20s and 30s, I had one of the first mountain bikes back in the early 80s. I've been able to get back on some of these roads now that with an e-bike class 1. And you really need to think that there's a lot of people out there that need the e-bikes to be able to do things maybe with their children, their parents, other things. So it's really important to think about the access above the ADA level. I also am very much thinking that class 3, the speed is probably too much for the multi-use trails and for most of the trails on there. You know, it's not a motorized, motorcycle. And then the one with the throttle, I would do to people that have handicap, because there may be certain handicaps where they can't pedal well and they can still get out there, but the speed is low and they can use it as a bike. So I'm saying that I agree with class 1. I'm thinking there's probably reasons class 2 should be able to be there for certain people, but not class 3 because it's too fast. And on my e-bike, I can go faster than that anytime that I'm going downhill, but I'll never go faster than what I think I'm going to be able to fall or not control.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Nancy, and thank you for just reminding us that ADA placards only go so far, and that there's a consideration about access for others and their ability to get out with friends and family. So we captured that, and we captured your comment about class 1, and then kind of the questions about class 2 and 3. It seems like others are putting those in the chat too. So thank you for that, Nancy. We do have a few more hands up, so I want to go to Bruce, and then Bruce, we do have 3 more hands up, and I want to make sure to get those too. So if we can all just kind of be brief and we'll get to the last few folks before we wrap up.
Okay, you there?
Yep.
Yeah, a couple of quick things. One of the things with the disabled hunter program in the state is you've got to turn in all your doctor's stuff from the doctor for them to deem you disabled at the state fish and wildlife level, which I have done, and other people I know have as well. So they're the ones that make the decision on whether you're disabled based on your doctor and the state's recommendation if you've got Social Security disability or whatever the case may be. Secondly, with the gentleman from the backcountry hunters, I can appreciate, hoofing in on leather, which I've done for most of my life until I was severely injured in 2012 and 2014. I can appreciate that, but there's also unfair advantages. Rifles that shoot 1,000 yards, trail cameras that are cell phone operated, artificial game calls, scents. Optics that look 2 miles or further. There's all these advantages. So, it's just evolving with the world. You know what I mean? The third thing is I've also been a horseback rider until I was injured my whole life. We had horses and pack mules. So I also understand the dangers of horses and horses being spooked. But you also got to understand horses have a mind of their own as well. And if you look at the standards from the health organizations, they will tell you how many hours a person gets hurt on a horse versus a bicycle. The fourth thing I would like to add is the bicycle that I ride. It's a specialized Levo. You can't import any of these e-bikes into the United States if they go over 20 miles an hour and they're over 750 watts. So that kind of nips that in the butt for speed wise as well. And that's a class 1, class 2, or 3 bike that is imported into the United States of America by a manufacturer. So that's all I've got to add.
Thank you, Bruce, and thanks for being here. We'll go to Larry and then Ken and David, and then I think we're going to have to wrap up. Larry, you're up. You might be on mute. Go ahead, Larry. Yep.
I own several mountain bikes and started mountain bike recreational racing when I was in my 40s. I'm now in my 70s, and so for most of my adult life, rode mountain bikes. Then for the last couple of years, had class 2 e-bikes, both for myself and my wife. And again, we're both in our 70s. And I think what gets a bad rap is our interpretation of throttle and then the consideration of speed. The throttle, to me, is just a little extra pedal assist boost. It certainly doesn't increase speed to the extent that I think many people unfortunately interpret. And then regarding the question of speed, especially at my age level, I can't see anybody going 28 miles an hour, either uphill or downhill, on what we might consider, traditional mountain bike trails. I think forest roads, if you're maybe had too much to drink, you might go that speed, but I don't think the most normal riders are going to either overuse the throttle and overuse speed. I think it's unfortunate that when they did the 3 classifications and started establishing the limits, that there wasn't a lot of thought put into the misuse of those terms.
Thank you, Larry. Hearing that speed is more of a concern maybe on roads where you could actually go faster than on most mountain bike trails. So I think we captured that. Ken, I think you're up, and then we'll go to David in our last couple minutes. Ken, you might be on mute. Ken, if you're talking, we can't. Go ahead, Ken. Go ahead, Ken. You're off mute now, it looks like. Ken, I don't think we can hear from you. You can try again or put a comment in the chat and we'll be able to capture that. I'm going to go to David just because I want to make sure we can hear from David, and Ken will come back to you. But Ken, go ahead and put your comment in the chat if you can. Go ahead, David.
I have been do you hear me?
Yep. Yep.
Okay. I wanted to make sure I was the right David.
Yep.
I have been a bike rider for all my life. I've ridden road bikes, mountain bikes, and now I'm into e-bikes. And the reason for that is that just like Nancy said, I am a senior, 79 years of age, and I have health issues which do not qualify as ADA, but are limiting my riding on other bicycles. And so I recently purchased an e-bike. I follow websites, watching what people do and considering for myself what I will do with my e-bike. My e-bike, as another person said, is limited to 20 miles per hour and 750 watts. And so I feel that using my e-bike, as Larry said, I can use the throttle to start if the surface or the conditions require me to do, or to get quickly from one spot to another if I need to. But you do not ride at 20 miles an hour and pedal and do that for any sustained period of time because it's difficult to do. And you run down your battery so quickly that you get no distance out of it. So my experience is in watching others and listening to them on website is they're generally riding between 5 and 10 miles an hour because we're out to see the world. We're out to go to the stores. We pick up things and carry it on our e-bikes, which we can't carry on our backs. These kinds of things. As I say, I have both
David,
knees replaced.
David, I'm gonna have to cut you off because we're gonna go back to the main group, but I really appreciate your input and the importance of the throttle. We're gonna go back to the main group in just 20 seconds.
Well, I just want to say I do agree with Nancy and Larry very much.
Okay. Well, thank you all for being here. We're going to take a look at the comments in the chat. Really appreciate your input and really appreciate hearing your love of recreation and love of public lands. So we'll talk to you in the main group in just.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to our breakout room. I'll just let folks trickle in for a moment. And I'm going to ask my colleague Cheryl to start sharing her screen in just a second. All right. Well, as you join, if you feel inclined, it would be great if you could share your name, your organization, if you are affiliated with one, and your primary recreation activity in the chat, just so we have a record of the interests that are being represented today and sort of a log of who is in the virtual room. All right. All right. Thanks, Cheryl. I'm seeing your screen. Okay. Well, we'll be spending about the next 45 minutes together sharing input on the 3 questions that Thomas posed in the main meeting. And before we get into the discussion, if you'll indulge me for just a couple of minutes, I will share the ground rules and an overview of how the discussion will flow. I'm seeing a couple people posting in the chat. Thanks, everyone. So just keep in mind Thomas's ground rules that he shared at the beginning, that there are no wrong answers, and we do have a pretty large group today. So make sure that you are sharing space with others when you are providing your input, because it'd be great if everyone could have a chance to share. I'm going to ask people to utilize the raise your hand function, and that's under the reactions button at the bottom of your screen. So if you click reactions and raise your hands, I'll use that as a cue for folks and I can just run down the list. And if you are calling in by phone, it is *9 to raise your hand, and so that way I can see you raise your hand. All right, Cheryl will be documenting your input on the virtual whiteboard, which we will save and compile after the meeting to share with the agencies. And you can see we're having a little bit of technical issues on Cheryl's screen, so I'll solve that in a second. But are there any questions before we begin? And I will go ahead and put these questions in the chat. Okay, I'm not hearing any questions. So if anyone would like to begin, go ahead and raise your hand and we can get started. Who's going to be brave?
You could also try a round robin.
Yeah,
there too at some point.
I can call on folks. I have the power as a facilitator. Robert, go ahead.
Yes, good afternoon. I'm Robert Palin. I'm a 62-year-old retired military veteran. I've been mountain biking for about 20 years in Washington, and just in the last 2 years have been e-mountain biking. In my viewpoint, and from what I've seen over the last 2 years of riding in the state, a class 1 e-mountain bike is virtually identical to a standard pedal bike in terms of the speeds, the usage, the trail wear, as many things that I can see. It's almost identical to a standard pedal bike. So I feel that class 1 e-mountain bikes should be allowed virtually everywhere that a standard bicycle is allowed.
Thank you, Robert. All right, Rachel, I see your hand next. Go ahead, Rachel.
Hello, my name is Rachel Fussell. I'm actually here on behalf of People for Bikes, which is a national trade association that represents over 300 member companies. But I'm here because we believe that the Washington DNR and Department of Fish and Wildlife should support class 1 electric mountain bikes with its park codes and allow electric bicycles on all non-motorized natural surface trails where bicycles are currently allowed, including mountain bike trails. So similar to what Robert just spoke on. But we believe more and more people are using electric bicycles, especially those who wish to continue riding a bicycle but are limited by age or disability or physical capacity. And as a new recreation option, their use can certainly bring the pleasure and freedom of bicycling to different types of users, facilitate recreation for many new demographics. There's a lot of reasons why electric mountain bikes as a new recreation is really important to accessibility and making our outdoor spaces accessible for lots of folks. And we believe that Americans will continue to purchase electric bicycles, especially class 1 EMTBs, because again, it allows accessible access to the outdoors when we all really need them. And we believe that state lands should be used for all people, whether they, however they choose to recreate. So I do think it's critical that Washington's natural resource agencies have sensible, consistent, fair, and realistic policies to guide this growing use of electric bicycles, especially around class 1. And yeah, thank you for hosting these public input sessions. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Rachel. Appreciate your comment. And Robert, would you mind lowering your hand if you don't have another comment?
Oh, yes, sure.
No problem. All right, next in the queue, I see Jeff, and then it'll be Larry and James. Go ahead, Jeff.
I'm Jeff Chapman. I'm a county elected official in Jefferson County. I've also represented horsemen over the years and hikers. I've been on most of the boards. And I have 5 horses, 2 electric bikes, 3 manual bikes, and cart and everything else. I'm also with John Wayne Riders, and we're going across state in a couple of weeks with all of those. So my feeling is that it's very hard to manage across agencies, and it's not just DNR and Fish and Wildlife, it's also state parks and local government and county. That'd be nice. I would like to see class 2 and class 3 out of this, so they're not supported on any of the state agencies, including state parks, on soft surface trails. And so we can have consistency when you go from one agency to another on the same trail. I mean, the law also expects that to happen. And it's hard to do when all the agencies have different policies. And so I would like class 1. Class 1, I have class 1. So, and I would support it on most trails except for very steep shared use trails that go into the backcountry. I don't think they're needed there. I'd also like to see how we're going to deal with class 3. You have to be 16 years old. So how would that law enforcement work with that? And there are other challenges to make it work across agencies, with which the law is a little weak on. So anyway, that's what I have to say.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate your comment. Next, I see Larry, and then James, you'll be after Larry.
Hi, everybody. I'm Larry Sabula. I want to speak also in favor of class 1 e-bikes being allowed virtually anywhere that bicycles are, in fact, everywhere. I think a lot of the opposition to them is hysteria. I also think it's ableist. I think access is important. And we tend to classify disability as you're in a wheelchair or you're fine. And as a 61-year-old guy who my knees and my back are pretty much shot from having built trails all through my 20s, I can tell you there are things in between. An e-bike has given the outdoors back to me, and I'm looking forward to riding the entire Palouse to Cascades Trail this summer. And that's my comment.
That sounds like a fun summer. Thank you, Larry. All right, I see James next. And Jeff and Larry, if you could just lower your hands so I can keep track of the queue, that would be great. Thank you. Go ahead, James. Oh, and James, it looks like you're on mute.
Hi there, my name is Jim Mantel. I'm out of Port Townsend, and my issue is I'm 67 and I am a pedal bicyclist. My issue with any type of class 1, 2, or 3 bikes, it's difficult to police. And how do you control access of someone that's on a class 2 or class 3? In addition, we don't know what future class bikes will be available, and they may even operate at a much higher speed than what class 1, 2, and 3 currently operate today. My instincts tell me is that we should not limit e-bikes to any roads, but we should be very careful, particularly soft trails, permitting any e-bikes on a soft trail. And that would be my recommendation, personally speaking.
Thank you, Jim. Okay, I don't see any more hands. Does anyone have a comment that they'd like to share?
Sorry, I can't find the raise hand feature. I see it under my bar.
That's okay. Go ahead, Juliet.
My name is Juliet Kern, and I am a cancer survivor. I had cancer at 34 years old. I do own an e-bike. I am not able to keep up with my friends who ride mountain bikes. So for me to be able to recreate with people my own age, having that access to ride bikes in the same location that my non-e-bike riding friends are riding is imperative. Again, I think it's an accessibility issue, and young adult, any cancer survivor, anyone that has had chemotherapy, doesn't necessarily have the ability to regain that full level of physical fitness. That's not eligible for a handicap. So that alone wouldn't entitle me to the ability to ride under our current legislation, which is closed unless you're the buffer for otherwise. And it's not, it's not equitable to also say that I can only ride on certain trails, because as my skill set grows and my downhill ability improves and increases, I do race downhill bikes. I should be allowed to, I should have that opportunity to ride in those spaces with my friends.
Thank you for sharing, Juliet. Okay, next up, I see a phone number that ends in 4869 with your hand raised. Go ahead. Oh, and if you're talking, you might be on mute. The 4869 number. Okay, while that number is trying to unmute, sometimes it's a double step on Zoom. You have to unmute yourself on the phone as well. I'll share something that has been put in the chat by Louise. Thanks, Louise. She says, non-motorized trails on public lands lack sufficient maintenance. Increased tire impact on soft trails will result in more disrepair and erosion. Electric bikes should be used on designated motorized lands. Thanks, Louise. And the comments in the chat may not make it into the mural, but we will be saving them for later. And the 4869 number, go ahead. I see you came off mute.
Okay, so I'm Richard Watford, Mountain Chelan County. I just want to say that I'm for Class 1 e-bikes in the area. I own both, mountain and an e-bike now. First, I was pretty jealous of everyone that had the e-bikes and was against it because I saw the access they were able to get. So I bought one and realized there's really not that much of an advantage over a regular mountain bike. I mainly use it for fishing and hunting, so getting into areas that I like to get in makes it a little easier on the way back, especially when you are packing out an animal, able to get back to it in a timely manner. So that's all I got to say. I just want to say I'm for Class 1s. I really don't see the need for Class 2s or 3s on the trails, but all for Class 1s. That's all I got.
Thanks for sharing. Appreciate it. Rachel, I see your hand next.
Great. I'll just wanted to make a quick comment. With Louise, I just wanted to say that Class 1 EMTBs and analog bikes, there's been lots of studies, both by IMBA in 2015, as well as an environmental assessment by the Tahoe National Forest that has clearly shown that the difference between analog bikes and Class 1 EMTBs are, there is no significant difference at all. So they interact on the trail tread similarly to the point where it's actually hard to distinguish them. So they aren't making more of a maintenance issue on the trails from the studies that we've seen. And there's more studies coming out, including some EMTB pilot projects that People for Bikes are going to be putting on. So there's lots of research coming out. Also, electric mountain bikes are helping trail crews across the nation to be able to maintain trails because they're able to get out further, carry more tools, and get more folks out there instead of having to hike long distances. And then in terms of enforcement, the other comment is that while there may be individuals practicing irresponsible trail use, this is certainly not the case for whole communities or user groups. And I think that whereas we don't say that, you know, if one hiker does something wrong, that the whole group then gets stigmatized, I think the reverse is happening with EMTB and Class 1 riders. So I think we need to be careful of stereotyping just because we might be nervous about something happening. Actions by individuals typically are just that, action by individuals. And by and large, mountain bike groups, EMTB groups are very respectful, and we're all trying to learn etiquette and enforcement. But state parks also have lots of rules like no drugs are allowed. How do we enforce those? It's really by common societal, maybe not pressure is the right word, but group enforcement, I guess. So I just wanted to raise those, and I saw some comments. So thanks.
Thank you. And I know that WDFW is also conducting a literature review, but thank you, Rachel, for sharing. Okay, there are no hands again. We have about half an hour left, so would love for folks to keep sharing for the 3 questions. Should e-bikes be allowed on non-motorized trails and closed roads? Which of the 3 classes? I'm hearing lots of support for Class 1 from folks who have shared so far. And what opportunities, challenges, or concerns should be considered by the agencies? I'm hearing enforcement as a challenge, as well as stigmatization of user groups as another challenge, but would love to hear from folks. Go ahead, Dave.
Hi, my name is Dave Crumbo. I'm in Anacortes, Washington. And no, and sorry, I'm unexpectedly in a car dealership for repair. So, yeah, I've mountain biked since 1990. 2 years ago, switched to a Class 1 EMTB to keep up with my adult boys, and I think that as far as trail impact, I have less trail impact now than I did before because I much easier to meter power, and I don't spin my tires. I got a little thicker tires so that there's no traction issues, not nearly the traction issues as a regular mountain bike. The only impact that an EMTB might have on a Class 1 anyhow over a regular, no, just I have a Denali, but yeah, I'm on a, sorry, is that I'm on the trails more, which I think is kind of the point of the trails to begin with. So I don't really think that you can show that as a disadvantage. And I also agree that etiquette is the only issue, whether you're on a horse or on feet or, you know, walking your dogs. I mean, in Anacortes, we're having the same issue, and we've got a 1-year trial period for EMTBs as to be considered as regular mountain bikes. And I think that anything we can do to educate people, that's the most important thing. I mean, there's people walking on the trails that scoop their dog's poop and then leave the bags along the side of the trail, you know, and that's no different than a rude mountain biker out there. But I don't think that Class 2 or 3 have a place on trails that are not open to regular mountain bikes. You know, those are much more motorcycles. So,
thank you, Dave. Appreciate you joining us, even on your errands. It's great for you to join. All right, Jeff, I see your hand.
I just want to add that, you know, I ride mountain bikes, you know, both e-bikes and non-e-bikes. And the one time I wound up in the emergency room was on an e-bike. And the reason was coming downhill, when you're coming down dirt on a dirt trail, coming down, or if it's muddy trail, you're riding a 60-pound bike instead of a 30-pound bike. And so there's a lot more force pushing you forward. So it was just harder for me to maneuver. And I know very well if some of my horses were coming up the hill, or anybody's horses for that matter, I wouldn't have been able to avoid them. So that's what concerns me is I won't use it on steep ground. I'll use my regular mountain bikes instead, because then I can get out of the way easily. So it's just a comment.
Thank you, Jeff. I see Cheryl noting it. Sorry to hear about your accident. All right. Would anyone else like to share? I see a couple folks who haven't shared yet. Any other concerns you'd like to voice about e-bike use?
I'm here, sorry, James, I cut you off because again, I couldn't find that button. I see a couple comments about mountain bikes not being used on very steep trails, but I have raced e-mountain bikes and enduro and regular bikes on the same trails, and they're downhill trails and they're downhill races. I haven't experienced, once I learned how to control the bike, I haven't experienced any sort of difference. I think it would be the same as coming down and losing control of a pedal bike, right? I mean, I think it's skill level. So, yeah.
Thanks for sharing your experience, Juliet. Go ahead, Jim. James, you might be on mute if you're trying to share.
Sorry about that.
All good.
Anyway, I wanted to piggyback on Jeff Chapman's earlier comments, and this has to do with those e-bike riders that may not have learned biking skills on a pedal bike. And my concern is that they may be operating a, I'll call it vehicle for no better term, and they may be, it may be twice or three times the weight of a potential road bike. And it may be north of their riding abilities that could pose potential danger to other trail users as well. And that could be either a walking pedestrian, another biker, or someone on horse.
Thanks, Jim. Definitely hearing some concerns about safety on the trail, especially with other users and user groups. So we'll be sure to document that. Let's see, I see, scrolling back up to the top. Catherine, go ahead.
Hi, I have concerns that people, I appreciate that there are a lot of crazy electric bicycle riders on the trails, and they think, oh, I can go faster, so I should go faster. But there's no difference than stupid people driving cars on a road. I mean, I just, unless you're gonna have to have some kind of a license to drive an electric vehicle, then or electric bicycle, you're relying on that person to be responsible. And if there are reasonable expectations on the trails, then the expectation would be that these people would follow the rules. But I think limiting the ability of people that are handicapped or otherwise unable to enjoy these trails, just because there are some people that want to control the ability of others. I mean, you can't, you can regulate it to death, but it's the outdoors, it's the environment, it's a bicycle. And I understand that it's a heavier bicycle, which is why the people that are on them should be more responsible when they're riding them. And maybe that stems from more education when people buy them. I'm not sure how you go about that, but it just seems to me that there's enough voice for limiting the ability to access our trails that has me very concerned.
Thanks, Catherine, for sharing. And I want to know in the chat, Kathy Smith wrote, an ADA placard doesn't allow a person to use a gas motorcycle on a non-motorized trail. I don't understand why it enables a person using an electric motorcycle. A disability warranting an ADA placard certainly raises a red flag for an electric bike on the trail. A road, okay, but not a trail. Thanks, Kathy. And if you want to come off mute to explain your comment any further, please feel free to raise your hand. And I'm also hearing a couple of comments about education and user etiquette. And so a question I'd just like to float for your consideration. We'd also like to hear your input on it. But what are some primary sources of trail information around rules and regulations or outdoor guidance? How do you receive that information, or do you have any input on how we should educate, or the agencies should be educating users? And I can go ahead and put that question in the chat. But just something to consider as you provide input. Heidi, go ahead.
Oops, sorry about that. Yeah, I guess I just wanted to speak a little bit to comment by, is it Kathy Smith, about the electric motorcycle, because it is only class 1 through 3 that's not, considered motorized. There is what is a class 4, and that's anything that actually does go above 28 miles per hour. and has a motor of more than 750 watts. So, and there also is an actual electric motorcycle that is, you know, completely like throttle assisted. So I just wanted to make that differentiation.
Thank you, Heidi. Juliet, I saw your camera go on. Go ahead.
Thank you. I also wanted to answer the question because it sounded like the question was why should a pedal assisted bicycle be allowed for someone with an ADA placard? And the answer is because people with disabilities also deserve the right to recreate.
Thank you, Juliet. And the 4869 number, go ahead. I see your hand up as well. You might be on mute if you are speaking.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so most people that are opposed to these class 1 e-bikes have actually never ridden a e-bike before in their life, and they just see people going fast. Well, you can go fast on a mountain bike too, but these class 1s, I mean, they're pedal assist. They're not, you can't just pull the throttle and you go. You're just being assisted up a hill or something, you know, you're not going 60 miles per hour down a trail. And add on to the control issues, these newer e-bikes now have hydraulic brakes, which compensate for that heavier bike, and you're just able to stop a lot easier on these steeper trails. But yeah, these people that are opposed to the idea are just, I believe they've never been on an e-bike in their life. So just want to throw that out there, and that's it.
Thank you. And just a reminder for people to try and speak to your own experience around using e-bikes if you can.
Okay.
But appreciate your comment. Thank you for sharing. Go ahead, Rachel.
Okay, sorry. Mainly I just wanted to comment on the speed topic because I'm hearing a lot, and it's before I worked for People for Bikes, I was also an executive director of a local mountain biking trail organization where we had similar e-bike policies come up. And when first of all, like what I saw was it was not a lot of young people, although they were certainly out there, but most people I saw in EMTBs, especially class 1s, were folks who were older or were recovering from injuries or had just gotten out of surgery or had chronic illnesses, and they were utilizing the class 1 EMTB to access the outdoor, as Juliet mentioned. So I really think that what I saw was a lot of that kind of demographic, not people just going out and completely disregarding etiquette rules. Because again, individuals sometimes don't may make mistakes or may disregard rules, but it's not typically entire user groups. And then I also want to talk to like the study around speed. So both class 1 EMTBs and analog, which I like to call them analog mountain bikes, traditional mountain bikes, whatever you want to call them, are similar modes of recreating when we've looked at them. They have similar components, similar speeds, which I'll talk about in a little second, and then impacts on the trail, and also health benefits, which is also good to note that health benefits are also quite similar to analog mountain bikes. And when you look at the data collected, which right now has just been through Tahoe National Forest, again, that FONSI and their environmental assessment, when they did comparative speed trials on the East Zone connectivity project within Lake Tahoe, they actually measured the difference between average and top speeds between intermediate and advanced riders on, again, both analog and class 1. And they did it over mixed terrain, including downhill, uphill, and flat sections of trail. And this was on a trail that already had seen heavy mountain bike use. So again, on a trail that already had mountain bikers using them. And the results show that the average speed was similar between class 1 electric bikes and their analog counterparts on flat and downhill sections. And then on uphill sections, class 1 electric bikes were able to definitely achieve higher speeds, but the speeds that they observed were well within the range of differences in speed that can be observed between a novice and expert rider on analog bikes. So in terms of the speed differential, I just want to put it out. The data that we've seen is that these slightly higher speeds by class 1 EMTBs on uphill sections do not represent a significantly increased safety risk to other user groups relative to the current level of use already occurring by electric mountain bikers or mountain bikers in general. So the big takeaway here is speed is largely determined by rider skill and the trail design, more so than it is by this class 1 EMTB is now coming in to change the way that safety is on trails. And again, this is based on one study. We're trying to get more, but I wanted to highlight the environmental assessment on Lake Tahoe and Tahoe National Forest, which they are currently, based on these really promising data that they collected, opening up more trails, or at least they have a public process to open up more trails in the Tahoe National Forest.
Thank you, Rachel. Okay, we have about 15 minutes left in our breakout room before we return to the main session. And there are a couple people we haven't heard from yet, Zach and Tara, or maybe Mike, let's see, Matt, Jacob, or Greg, or Alan. If any of you would like to share, either coming off mute or in the chat, we would love to hear your perspectives. Go ahead, Zach.
Hi, I'm Zach. I just wanted to share support for what everybody said about Class 1 e-bikes. I don't ride an e-bike, but I ride with a lot of people who it's very important for their being able to use the trails, and I think it's great and a positive experience. I haven't heard folks talk about Class 2 e-bikes, which to me, I do see an opportunity for allowing even more access with Class 2 e-bikes, maybe via ADA placards or some other access restrictions. But I think generally these spaces should be able to be used by anybody who can safely use them, and that it's mostly an etiquette problem, like folks have suggested. And so I don't know the research around Class 2 e-bikes in these shared spaces, but I think that anywhere where these have been researched to be safely shareable, then we should allow people to access them however they like.
Thank you, Zach. Appreciate your comment. Let's see, Tara, Mike, Matt, Kurt, anyone that like to share? Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I'm Mike Lilga. I'm from the Tri-Cities area. I'm with the Taptail Greenway. And we help the city of Richland manage trails throughout the Tri-City area. And I'm really here not as a e-bike owner. I have a mountain bike and I ride trails, but mostly I'm just here to learn about the issues, and I'm hearing a lot of stuff from you guys that is helpful to me. Our area is trying to figure out what to do about e-bikes, and so I'm just really here to try and get a little bit educated. But based on what I've heard today, at least, I'm kind of falling on the side of really just Class 1 bikes, e-bikes, as long as they are similar to a regular mountain bike. I think that's a good way to go. The main issues we have, I think, with trail use is they're multi-use. It's mostly a trail etiquette thing. We have a lot of equestrian use on our trails out here. And so bike horse interactions, I think, are really important. And I think it's some of the things I've heard, and I don't know if they're founded or not, but just like bikes coming up behind horses. is kind of spooky for the equestrians, and so it's, you know, it's an education thing. But on the other hand, I think kind of limiting speeds on trails is really important. And so I'm kind of in the camp today, at least, of trying to limit speeds, and if performance is the same as a regular mountain bike, I think that's something that can be dealt with.
Thank you, Mike. And thanks for joining. I'm glad that it's been helpful to learn a little bit about e-bikes as well through participating. So appreciate your comment. Okay, we just got to notice there's 10 minutes left. So please feel free to continue raising your hands to provide comments. And I am hearing a lot about still education and etiquette. So I just want to circle back to the question I posed in the chat just a little bit ago. But what are primary sources of information about trails, rules, and regulation or recreation guidance that you've experienced, or if you have any input on how to provide that education, that is also welcome. Go ahead, Zach.
So I think they should be shared in as many ways as possible, including simple guides shared at the places where people access these spaces. One thing I know with leading a lot of group rides is that a lot of people just don't know, and so just sharing the basic principles with the people at the place, like when they're at the point of accessing these spaces, I think is just provide a lot of impact.
Thank you, Zach. Anyone else have suggestions or input on how to provide education? Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, I just want to say that some of our local folks are up in Canada, and provincial parks up in Canada limited e-bikes on a lot of trails to what their version of class 1. But they also, you know, would then put out a lot of information about, okay, we're all going to do class 1. So when consumers go out to buy a bike, they should consider what trails they want to ride on, and make sure that, you know, don't buy a class 2 or a throttle driven bike if they're not allowed. We're not in Washington, we're not giving them that kind of public feedback because we haven't set the rules yet. And as you know, like RAD and other bike manufacturers are promoting class 2 bikes, and a lot of people are buying those now. And so this is going to be like, you know, chasing your tail, where all of a sudden we decided to have a set of rules 2 or 3 years down the road when all these folks are out there with class 2 bikes. So then we have to say, well, now do we go back and tell them you bought the wrong bike? So the sooner I think that DNR and Fish and Wildlife find up a standard, one that everyone can understand, then put out signs, and then put out the information. So when consumers go to buy bikes, they know that they can't buy a bike that isn't allowed on the trail.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate your comment about informing users about where they can and cannot use their bikes upon purchase. We have about 7 minutes left, so I'm going to open up the floor to anyone who would like to continue to share about any of the questions. Go ahead again, Zach.
I'll just agree with what I think that was Jeff who was talking. I talked to a lot of people about buying e-bikes and helping guide them in that journey, and the topic of whether to get a class 1 or class 2 never even equates into the conversation. And I know these rules are all kind of being figured out, but that's I think in my experience, a lot of folks I talk to are looking for bikes that can do more things, and so they end up seeking bikes that have throttles or whatnot for the times when they might want that, not realizing that that might be a limiting factor in terms of access. And if that, I assume before this call that class 1 and 2 were both sort of allowed equally in these spaces due to my lack of knowledge. But knowing that that's not the case, I think that that's a very good point, that education needs to be shared.
Thank you, Zach.
Quick question, Claire. Do you know where the e-bike pilot projects are happening in Washington State?
I believe there is one. Heidi might be better suited to answer this question. There's one at Darrington State Park. Heidi, are you familiar with the other ones that DNR will be piloting?
Andrea would be the best one to answer that. I know that they've looked at Capitol Forest, and I think that they're going to have like another 2 that they're planning on. I'm not sure where those are.
Great. I can follow up with you out. I can email too. Thank you.
Yep, Rachel, we can follow up with you with the locations. All right, got 4 minutes left. And I don't have control over when the breakout rooms are over. So I will start using my facilitator chops and call on people for the last couple minutes as we're wrapping up. Chuck, I see you have your camera on. Would you like to share any thoughts before we finish up the breakout room? Oh, and you're on mute if you are trying to share.
There we go. Well, I apologize. I just got on. I forgot about the starting time, but just a person from Wenatchee here. We hike the foothills around Wenatchee, everywhere from Chelan to Mission Ridge to the Torpiscan area of the Clockham. And I guess because I'm a hiker, not a biker, I'm a little anxious about the idea of having the e-bikes out on the trails. Just my experiences with being active around the community here, like I have been for many years. The four-wheelers, the motorbikes, they don't stay where they're supposed to stay. And I'm just afraid that this is just going to add another element to people going off-road. Because there's, it's just so hard to enforce when you have so many miles of roads, and they're signed and the green dot and all that, but they're just very little enforcement that I see. And it's frustrating to be hiking somewhere off of a trail and then come upon a motorbike or a ATV. So I guess I'm coming from the anti side of things.
Well, thank you for sharing, Chuck. I appreciate it. Thanks for indulging me calling on you as well. Glad you could join us today.
What's the progress as far as moving forward after this meeting today?
So next steps after the public process will be compiling all of these comments, and then DNR and DFW will be submitting a report to the legislator later this fall on the findings. I think we have time for about 1 or 2 more comments or questions at this point. We do have Heidi in the room to answer anything that the people want to know if we're able to. Oh, go ahead, Juliet.
Hey, thanks. I may have missed something. And just in summary, I'm reading over item 1 under what circumstances, if any, should e-bikes be allowed on non-motorized trails? And I don't see that anyone has said all under all circumstances, and I would like to include that.
All right, thanks, Juliet. We'll note that. And breakout rooms are closing in about 60 seconds, so you can feel free to go ahead and leave. But thank you everyone for your input and your participation. Really appreciate it. So I'm going to go ahead and leave the breakout room, and we'll see you all back in the main session.
Or use the chat. So there you hopefully heard recording in progress, and we're going to spend about 45 minutes together. So hopefully that's ample time for everyone to get their voice heard, and we'll be capturing all your input and comments onto this mural board. So that's kind of the layout of the next 45 minutes together. I do ask that if you have questions, you can put them in the chat. Again, the focus of this is to get input. We do have some experts with us in the room if there's any major questions, but we're really going to try to get your input on these 3 questions on the screen today. And I'll be facilitating and queuing people up. So if you'd like to verbally respond to any of those questions, please hit that raise hand button. It's at the bottom of your screen on the right-hand side. With a little smiley face, you can click on that and then raise your hand, and I'll call on folks as they come up. If you are on your phone, you can dial *9, and that's also raises your hand. But if you're struggling to find all of those things, you can also put your name in the chat, and I'll put you in the queue. So I see one hand, and again, I'll just point you all to the 3 questions you see on the screen and that Thomas shared earlier. Under what circumstances, if any, should e-bikes be allowed on non-motorized trails and closed roads on lands managed by DNR and WDFW? Which of the 3 classes may be allowable, if any or all? And if anyone needs a refresher on those classes, let me know. And then what opportunities, challenges, or concerns should be considered regarding e-bike use? So got a couple people in the queue. James, I'll start with you and then head to Dylan.
Right. So I ride electric mountain bikes, mountain bikes, basically, mostly in the Capitol Forest area in Olympia. I think that e-bikes should be allowed everywhere. I think it's more of a speed limit problem. Some people don't want others to go by them super fast. So whether someone has a throttle or is pedaling, to me, isn't a big deal. It's really about how fast. How fast is this trail rated for?
Thanks, James. And maybe I'll follow up quickly on that with talking about speed. It kind of brings me to thinking about trail etiquette. And so for you or others to think about too, of what primary sources of information about trails, rules and regulations, or other outdoor recreation guidance, how to keep that in people's awareness. But you can type a response in the chat, James, but I will go to Dylan next, and then I've got Scott, and then Jenny afterwards. Jenny Hennessy.
Hey, good afternoon. Thank you. I will respectfully disagree with the gentleman who spoke before me, and I'm of the opinion that e-bikes should not be allowed on non-motorized trails, possibly with the exception of folks who have handicap placards or are above a certain age threshold. I'm also a mountain biker, hiker, and I find that really often the folks who are on e-bikes are moving much more close to a motorcycle speed. An average human produces maybe 100 watts of power, and your e-bikes producing 750 watts of power. And as battery technology and everything else improves, they're only going to get more speed, lighter, faster.
Dylan, sorry to interrupt. We're beginning to lose you a little bit with the disconnection. Okay. I'm hearing most of it, but just maybe if you could write your comment in the chat. We put some of it on.
Okay, got it.
Thank you. Okay, Scott, I have you up next, then Jenny Hennessy, and then Daniel Grillo. And Scott, you are on mute currently.
There we
you go.
go.
There you go.
Can you? Yeah,
Yes.
thank you. I've been mountain biking for 34, 35 years. I love climbing as much as I love downhill riding. Unfortunately, a few years ago, I actually have an ADA placard now because I came down with a neurological movement disorder. And so I switched to an e-bike because I thought my mountain biking days were over unless I drove to the top, shuttled. And I don't see the problem with class 1 bikes at all. They are governed. You can go uphill a little faster. Downhill, they're actually slower. I've been doing Strava since it came out, and all my times are slower downhill on my e-bike because I can only get up so much assisted speed. Whereas with my other Trek Remedy, I could hit a run doing 30 miles an hour. Whereas with my e-bike, I'm lucky to get 20, 21. This whole argument kind of reminds me of snowboards when they first came out. The old skiers were like, oh no, we don't want these young punks. Not that I'm a young punk, I'm 61. But I think it just comes down to common trail sense and courtesy. We don't tear up the trail anymore than any other bikes. And even though I now have an ADA placard, I think I should be able to ride on the trails with my friends that don't ride e-bikes instead of having to go to the motorcycle trails, which are more dangerous for me and for the motorcycles. They actually go uphill faster than they do downhill, and bikes are the opposite. Regular bikes are the opposite. So I think it just comes down to people don't like this new technology. They're stuck in the past, and it's the future. And I think we just need to come up with rules and regulations to make it safe for everybody and allow people to get out and have fun, because that's why we all mountain bike, because it's fun.
Thank you for those thoughts, Scott. Jenny, I have you next, then Daniel, and then Tibby. Hopefully I pronounced that right.
Okay, great. Sorry, I was on mute.
Okay.
So I also have been riding mountain bikes for 20 years. I'm from Idaho. I'm relatively new to Washington. I've only been here 10 years. But as others have mentioned, there's always going to be trail conflict on no matter what you do, motorcycles, mountain bikes, skiing, motorcycles, whatever. So we all have to figure out how to work together because there's only so many trails. I think the biggest thing for me is I do love the ability, and I love the fact that e-bikes are becoming popular, and that is allowing people that were not previously allowed to bike but love it an opportunity to do so. I think the biggest things for me, and I think a couple other people mentioned this, is the speed in which people are traveling on the trails is very concerning to me. I've been almost hit a couple of times by people coming up too fast on me or coming around corners that I didn't expect. And so I'm actually worried a little bit about my safety. And then the other thing is concerns over like trail maintenance and taking care of our trails. I have seen a couple of different types of e-bikes, and I don't know the actual different classifications, but for me, it's clear like they get stuck in something and the wheels are just spinning and you can see the dirt flying, which makes me like really nervous because of what that's doing to our trails and the maintenance that's going to be required. And then there was one other one I can't remember. I think that was it. But I'm for e-bikes. I just think we need to figure out how we all work together to make sure that everyone is safe and their trails are taken care of. Oh, I have one more. I remember what it is. I'm sorry.
That's okay. We've got the time.
The one thing that is, I think, is like confusing to people is the different classifications and the throttle versus not throttle and the what's considered a motorcycle and what's not. I think when people see e-bikes, like I've seen different bikes on trails around the Seattle area, but I'm like, that looks like a motorcycle, and it has like it is electric in some way, but it literally looks like a motorcycle. But people are taking the interpretation of e-bike and saying, well, it doesn't have a motor, so it's okay. So I think there has to be really clear distinction in a simple way, because people don't intuitively know like the different classifications of bikes of what is allowed and what is not allowed as an e-bike. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And also know I see some folks typing in the chat. So for those of you typing in the chat, thank you. And just know that we're also capturing your comments. So those will be captured as well after this meeting. So next I've got Daniel, then Tibby, and then Ken. So Daniel, go for it.
Hello, thank you. I think the overarching theme of my feedback is that the community needs to be able to regulate. So you'll see that theme come through in answers to all three of these questions for me. Because as much as we appreciate the leadership and guidance from our land manager partners, we also understand the enforcement and challenges of showing up at trailheads and talking and telling users about changes in regulations. So I think community enforcement and clarity is really important. Under what circumstances should they be allowed? I think that if the decision is made that e-bikes should be allowed, that it would be appropriate only on one-way biking specific trails, where the flow of traffic is moving in one direction and the users that are on that trail are expecting to see folks moving at the rate of speed of a bicycle. I also think that circumstances that should be a part of that would be whatever the qualifications may be. Currently, it's ADA placards, and if we're going to continue with some other kind of qualification, that qualification needs to travel with the rider on the trail, similar to the way that land manager partners at Campbell Global are managing the influx of gravel riders in their area, or Palmer Coking Coal managing riders in the west side of the trails at Black Diamond Open Space. So it's not unheard of to be asked to carry a license, and I think in this case, because they're actually on a different type of vehicle, so to speak, that it would need to come with them as opposed to be at their vehicle at the trailhead. That's also assuming that they're taking a vehicle to the trailhead, because we're also graced with a lot of pedalable access trails here in the Northwest. Which of the three classes? I really like the comments of the last speaker. I don't think that agencies, other trail users, nor consumers are really differentiating between the classes of e-bikes so much as legislators and manufacturers. And I think that if we did a blind test, I think the majority of us, even regular trail users, would struggle to differentiate. If it's got an electric motor, if it has two wheels, we can assume that if the general message is that those are allowed on the trails, then we will see all varieties. And in the explosion of e-bike popularity in the last few months and years, that is what we have seen on the trails, is all varieties from e-moto to class 3, class 2, class 1 e-bikes. What opportunities, challenges, concerns? I think one of the big ones that I haven't heard a lot talked about is search and rescue. I think that access is a true gift, and we do need to, having worked with some search and rescue organizations in preparing them to extricate someone from an adventure out in the woods, we do need to consider the weight of the bike that we would need to be rescuing along with the person, the ability of an unimpeded person that is out there in the wilderness, and also just the readiness of the users and the community to recognize the potential risks that they're putting themselves into. Another opportunity, challenge, or concern would be the enforcement. Again, we know this is a challenge now in terms of access, speed limits, et cetera, one-way demarcations, et cetera. And I think we'd be opening up a new set of challenges. Trail design. We've got some amazing trail design oversight here in Washington, a partnership between organizations like Evergreen and land managers, and it helps to be able to take the full user group into account when designing those trails for sustainability. The advocacy work, we need to consider whether the mountain bike community is ready to be considered along with moto users when we're talking about access. We'd have to talk about public relations. So trailhead signage kind of gets a lot of the attention because we think that signs can solve everything, but I think regular users know that signs don't solve everything. So that would be trailhead signage, it would be community signage, it would be on-trail signage, it would be, nonprofit asking for really ambassadorship in the nonprofit community, step out in front. And if partners aren't ready to do that, then I think we need to question whether we're ready to spread a message. And then the last thing is similar concerns to other motorized trail dangers. The reason that the paved cycling community is very careful and intentional with e-bike access to long fought bike legislation such as separated bike lanes are because a lot of the concerns about motorized users come back into play when you're introducing a mixture of motorized users and non-motorized users into the same play space. And so we just have to start considering motorized trail user considerations overall.
Well, thank you for all that detailed and thoughtful feedback. I appreciate it. I'll go through my list. Tibi Botokan, you're next. Then we've got Ken Ringer, then Maureen Hoffman, then Mark Smith, then Andrew Stevens, and Scott. I'm not sure if you re-raised your hand, but I see hand is raised, and I'll just encourage other folks. We've got about 30 minutes left in this breakout room. So if you'd like to raise your hand, please do. But Tibi, please go for it.
Hello, thank you for giving us this opportunity to express how we feel about this. I've been owning an electric bike for 2 years now, and I strongly get the feeling that the people I hear talking about electric bikes, they probably never rode one. And it just feels that way. You know, they're describing an e-bike as this monstrous piece of equipment that it is different than a regular bike or a mountain bike, and is going to get on the you know, roads and trails, and is going to be a disaster with safety concerns, and is going to tear the trails apart and all that. That is far from the truth. It is a regular bike that has got a battery and has got a motor that people with limited physical conditions that could be either due to an illness or age, people who do not qualify for an ADA permit, to be able to get out of the house and enjoy nature, enjoy places where they can find some quiet, where is quiet enough where you can see birds chirping and all that, far away from the traffic and everything else. They're very safe. I like to hike. I've been myself on trails many times, and regular mountain bikes, you know, yes, they flew by me many times. I felt a couple of times at least in danger of a regular mountain bike. It all comes down to people being respectful, people obeying to rules. In my opinion, I think class 1 and class 2 e-bikes should be allowed everywhere. And that's because of the speed limit of 20 miles per hour. It is rarely when you get to 20 miles an hour. I mean, you might get that on a regular road where there is a traffic of cars. You might get to that speed, but you never get that on a mountain road or on a trail or anything like that. I would never do it because, I mean, it would not feel safe for me. If my bike would not have a battery and the motor, and would be like a regular mountain bike, I can achieve 20 miles an hour if I want to, going downhill, you know. So it wouldn't, there is no difference between an e-bike and the regular bike, I would say. Some of those e-bikes, they have, just like mountain bikes, some of them, they have fat tires. And I think, you know, they protect the trail because the tracks they're making, they're much wider than a regular tire. Which I think it's a benefit. So yes, class 1 and class 2, I think they should be allowed everywhere. I think the limitations that would be appropriate would be speed limitations. It ultimately would come down to people being respectful. I don't think it's going to be, you know, a forest agent with a radar detector up on the trails in the mountains to check out people's speeds. so it will come down to people being respectful towards each other and obeying those particular rules. I believe that signs work. So having signs posted at the trailheads, that would be helpful. And I do encourage people who talk about, e-bikes and they have an opinion about it, to go ahead and ask a friend who has one, to let them ride it and see how it is, see how it feels, see how safe it is to ride an electric bike. And while you're riding it, think about the people around you to see how you feel about them. If you think you are a hazard, to the people around you. And I feel confident that most of those people, they would change their opinions about e-bike and they would be in favor of it. But there are a lot of people, especially after COVID, that, they have some kind of long lasting effects from the COVID, where their physical abilities, they're not like they used to be. And it's hard to go uphill riding a regular bike. And if I can't do it, that means I'm not getting out of the house. An e-bike would allow someone with those inabilities to enjoy life and feel like they're still alive. And again, that could be because of an illness, physical impairments or inabilities, or age as well. And just being old, you don't get an ADA permit.
Thank you so much. I don't mean to interrupt. We've just got folks in the queue and limited time. So really appreciate those thoughts. If you weren't able to wrap them up, please put them in the chat. But I will go to Ken Ringer next, then Maureen, then Mark Smith, then Andrew, and Kyle, I see you've also joined the queue. So Ken Ringer, to you. Ken, we can't hear you yet if you are speaking. Okay, I'll come back to you. I'll go next to Maureen Hoffman.
Hi, everybody. I am a class 2 e-bike rider, and I got the bike about 4 years ago because of my knee. I can't ride a regular bike with my knee, but with the e-bike, it allows me to. So it really has increased the access. I read the classifications of the 3 bikes, and I think we dramatically need to revise those so they're simplified and people have a better understanding. This is probably codified in state law somewhere, but essentially, class 1 is pedal assist capped at 20 miles an hour. Class 2 is pedal assist capped at 20 miles an hour with a throttle. Class 3 is pedal assist capped at 28 miles an hour, no throttle. Just simplify it so people have an understanding of that. I do wonder about, these days I'm on my bike or I take walks in my neighborhood. I have not been out on the trails in the parks or fish and wildlife properties for quite a long time. But if I'm going to go out on a trail, even as an e-bike rider, I think, well, I don't want someone coming by me quickly. And this really comes down to safety and courtesy. And that's whether you're on the trails, the dirt trails in the mountains or on the city bike lanes and such. So I don't know how we solve that. I do think that we need to separate the question of e-bike use on either the natural surface trails versus the closed roads. I think closed roads, have at it. I think there should not be any constraints on that, on the closed roads. Make use of those. On the natural surface trails, perhaps class 1 and class 2. I'm not a mountain biker, so I can't relate to that access of it. I don't have background in that. That's about all I needed to say.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, Mark Smith, then Andrew Stevens, then Kyle, and then back to Scott. And that's
Thank
Kyle
you.
McFarley. Yes.
Thank you. Yes, I was one of the citizens who did support 5452 and helped with Senator Cleveland and the others to bring this about in all disclosure. I'm over 60. I'm not going to tell you how old, but I'm an outdoor enthusiast. I've ridden horses. But you can do it. I've done it, but my age doesn't allow me to continue to do that. I found that the e-bike technologies under the 3 classifications with the 750 watt 1 horsepower limit, because that's what it is, provides me the ability to extend my adventures and allow me to go outside and allow me to enjoy the areas that I grew up loving and enjoying. I do understand the natural surface trails to the non-motorized roads. And as Maureen pointed out, that argument is something where they should be looked at per trail. Are the trails safe enough to be able to ride in that? And I don't think any e-biker is really overly concerned to be able to ride on every trail in the state in that. But when you have closed non-motorized roads that were former logging roads that had 100,000-pound log trucks going down them, and we're not allowed to ride an e-bike on them because they're worried about damages or that, that's really a problem. I also think that the benefit is the health benefits. Everyone says you're cheating. I get a really good workout and an even workout, and it's really comfortable to be able to get outdoors. And I think I'm in better shape than I have been. Which of the 3 classes should be used? I think that e-bikes are a smart technology. You're not going to be able to really tell the difference easily. It's more the etiquettes of the trail and the road that we have to look at. And I think that we really need to look at allowing people to use them as long as they're in those class 1, 2, and 3s and not regulate that problem. The throttle situation, that's more for like an assist if you're a little older, you're in trouble, or your safety feature. And that throttle, you can't use all the time on these class bikes, because if you do, you're not going to get back. Those throttles eat up battery and battery life goes away, and batteries are the assisted fuel. What opportunities and challenges there are? We have great opportunities. We have hundreds of thousands of miles of road, logging road, all through this state. And to shut off these old logging roads, to not allow people to spread out and not be on so many trails like we're forcing people, this would extend the amount of existing trails that we'd have for opportunities for outdoor recreation. I think that's something we need to look at. And the other thing is, we can't classify an e-bike with a mountain bike. A mountain bike is a sport. People ride up a hill and then try to come down as fast as they can with their adrenaline. So they use an e-bike to assist them to get to the top of the hill, and then they come down faster. The average speed I ride my e-bike is about 6.5 miles an hour. I mean, that's just what it is. I think the fastest I've ever been, as the gentleman said, driving down the road is about 14, and that's down a highway. I'm not a speed junkie. I'm an older person who wants to get out and enjoy them. And I think they're a marvelous opportunity as long as they are pedal assist, they have pedals, and you have to ride them. And they're the only thing on the trail that can be limited in their speed. A horse can reach 56 miles an hour in a short distance. A mountain bike rider averages somewhere between 27 and 30 on their downhills, or 17 is average, but an e-bike can't go any faster than 20 that's regulated, except a class 3, and it's regulated at 28. Technology is also smart technology, so any of the bikes can be adjusted to meet the requirements that you would come up with. And I think that they're the future, and I think that change is hard for people to understand. And I used to be that way when I was younger, but I think change is usually for the better. And thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, we've got Andrew Stevens next. Ken Ringer, if you are back or having troubles with your mic, please put it in the chat, as I do have you on the queue. But we'll go to Andrew Stevens, then Kyle, and then hopefully to Ken, and then Scott. So Andrew.
Hi there. My name's Andrew Stevenson. I ride mountain bikes, I ride gravel bikes, I ride road bikes, and I ride e-bikes. So I've ridden them all. And I'm really not going to get involved in categorizing one or the other, but I want to make an observation. I have for 16 years been intimately involved with a 3-foot wide natural tread trail, 26 miles that runs through DNR lands. And I've been involved in promoting, maintaining, and observing that trail. And I just want to make the following observation. Over that 16 years, e-bikes have come, and we have seen more and more e-bikes. And now our trail is a very attractive trail for e-bikes. It was built with cycling in mind and is used heavily. Over the 16 years, what I've noticed is that we are continually losing our marginal users. We're continuing to have people who are hikers, who are equestrians, who are more vulnerable to speed problems, are low speed users. And the number of users that we have in those categories continue to drop. When you interview those people about why they're not using the trail anymore, why they're not out there anymore, the problem is that they're having a real serious problem with the speeds of the cycles. And I'm not pointing at e-bikes, I'm pointing at all the cycles. And there is a common perception, the common thing I hear from all of our disaffected users who leave our trail is we're getting past too fast, and it's because the e-bikes came on the scene. I'm not going to say whether that's right or wrong, but I think we need to keep in mind that the public perception is that e-bikes are contributing to driving equestrian users, hiker users, and others off our trails. That's not a good position to be in. That's not a good place to be. So with that said, I echo strongly the last 2 or 3 commenters who say one size fits all is a real bad answer. What works on logging roads, what works on gravel surfaces, what works on trails in more open country in the east does not work on trails tight in the west. We need to find a way to differentiate amongst all the various opportunities on DNR so that we don't end up forcing so many people off of trails that they love because they're getting run out of town. Thank you. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you those in the chat putting your comments in there. Once again, those are being captured. So we've got Kyle McFarley next, and then Scott, and then Ken Ringer. And I'll say we have about 15 minutes left before we go back to the main room. So if you'd like to raise your hand, now's a good time. And if not, keep comments coming in the chat. So Andrew Stephen, oh, sorry, Andrew, you just went. Kyle McFarley, to you.
Hi, my name is Kyle McFarley. I'm zooming in from Walla Walla, Washington today. I do trail work in both Washington and Oregon with a group called the Blues Crew under the Blue Mountain Land Trust. Getting a call, let me send this to voicemail. So I ride a class 1 pedal assist electric mountain bike. I've been a bike enthusiast my entire life. And I made this choice because I went out and rode with a friend in Colorado and realized, wow, this is amazing what I can do. I'm so busy with all the things that I keep up with. I can't be the distance cyclist that I once was. And so I now use this pedal assist hardtail for commuting around town. I find that it helps out with parking density issues, both in downtown. I live across from Pioneer Park. I see a lot of people cycling to play pickleball, to play on the play equipment. It really solves a lot of our parking issues. I do use it on trails, and I use a bell. I used hand signals. I'm kind of a nerd. I wear my helmet. I grew up with polite behaviors. I do know that some users they're of a different generation. They didn't learn to be polite around people. I know that on narrower bike trails, I was recently in Bend. When things are dense, you got to slow down. And I think that identifying density areas and putting in rules and regulations for the density areas is important. I think that some areas are not dense, and in those non-dense areas, we don't need to be as concerned, and we don't need to have rules and regulations regarding that. Green Lake, for example, are e-bikes appropriate there? I don't know. It's the last time I was at Green Lake in Seattle. I mean, it was a zoo. Is that totally different from the Blue Mountains in Eastern Washington? Absolutely, yes. Are all the gravel roads now accessible to me and for others? I have a big concern for the baby boomer generation, and I see them being out and active, and I know that these pedal assist bikes are game changers. I'm 48 and I had knee surgery. I get sciatica. I have to do sciatica stretches. Like, I ride my bike all the time. It helps me get out. I tow my 6-year-old son with his mountain bike with a little bungee that I made. It's great. Has anybody ever been caught in my bungee? No. Is it worse than dogs? No. I think the dog problem on our trails is far worse than anything that we're dealing with electric bicycles. In terms of the threats facing Washington State, public trails, roads, things like this, there are greater issues with the Jeep people, with the dogs, with the off-leash dogs, with the aggressive dogs, with the people. Everybody seems to have an anxiety disorder this day, in the, you know, especially after COVID. And so their perception of the risk that they're facing when a cyclist comes by might be a little exacerbated right now. And I do know that slowing down around people, being cautious, not knowing what struggles they're dealing with is in taste. But this is my 2 cents. I see it a lot. I work on trails. I don't think that we're damaging the trails with pedal assist bikes. The Chiron type motorcycle e-bikes, those are a different kettle of fish. And I've seen them on sidewalks. I see them racing around in the park, in different parks. Those are something else. And I think that that needs to be legislated through Washington Department of Licensing, and they need to have a motorcycle endorsement for those. Those will go 40 miles an hour.
Thanks, Kyle. I do want to give, we got about 10 minutes left. I want to give Ken Ringer an opportunity, as we haven't heard from you yet. And then we can go to Scott again. But Ken, is your audio working? I'll give you another 10 seconds. We're not able to hear you. I'll type it in the chat. Okay, well, hopefully before we go to the main group, you can get your audio figured out. I don't see anybody's hand that is new, so Scott, we'll go back to you.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, there's a whole gamut of things that I hadn't thought of, Green Lake or whatnot, but I personally, I'm thinking of Capitol Forest out of Fall Creek, Tiger Mountain, Raging, places like that that are mostly e-bikes, or mostly mountain bikers, I should say. And I've been doing this since the mid 80s. And every time there's a change to a mountain bike, be it suspension, front suspension, rear suspension, disc brakes, we've gotten faster because we can. The bikes have gotten lighter. We can go faster up and down. And there's always a safety issue with mountain biking. And you don't go to Predator on Tiger Mountain if you're not a pretty good mountain biker. And if somebody's coming by fast, you shouldn't be surprised. But I just think that e-bikes are the future. They don't tear up the trail any more than any other bikes. I don't think most e-bikers, not that there's many out there that I've seen, I see a few on Strava, but I rarely run into them. But again, I have an ADA placard, but I just don't see the reason why we would cut out more people that can help us when we want to, push for less logging or more trails, people that can help make trails. I think again, I'll go back to the snowboard analogy. I think it's a lot of old timers that are they don't like the new technology, the new changes, even though they've all gone to full suspension, lightweight, carbon fiber, you name it. And like many people have said, just try one. if you have any questions, just try it, because even if I didn't have this disability and I tried one, I would buy one because they're so much funner, and it's all about having fun, getting out in the outside and just having a good time.
Thank you. I might have seen another hand go up. There's many of you that left your hands up, so I'm going through, and I think you can come off mute and let me know if you have re-raised your hand, as we've got a couple minutes left.
I have re-raised my hand if it's possible. Are you there?
Great. I think I saw Daniel also go off mute, so if you
Okay.
could keep it to a minute, that would be wonderful.
I will. The one thing I forgot that's very important is our state agencies do influence private landowners in the state also, and a lot of the private lands that you have to buy permits on that are closed logging roads that don't allow motorized, since they call these motorized in their WACs for DNR and WDFW, and don't use the RCW, which considers the class 1, 2, and 3 to be also considered as non-motorized, these private landowners don't allow them. And it's basically because when you talk to them, they say, well, the state doesn't approve them, then we're not, because they're influenced by DNR and WDFW. So how we manage this also will influence private lands that we would, like to be able to access and could. So just want to make sure that point was made. Thank you.
Thank you. Daniel?
Yeah, I had a question. I guess it's more for the land managers themselves. I think it's an indisputable fact that that assisted bicycles allow access to a broad group of users, and I think that the question that the land managers have to ask is, what are the what's the threshold where we're considering things in addition to access? If access is the ultimate goal, then we'd be working on making access to every trail for every type of user that exists. And if we think about what the thresholds are that land managers are willing to flex and stretch and adjust on in order to continue to keep their land relevant to the recreation community, as we so appreciate from DNR, I think those are going to be good questions to answer as they look at potentially expanding the user group. Because it is an undeniable fact that they increase access. That's not what people are disputing. I think the question is what are the risks with that access, and are those risks worth it from the land manager perspective?
Thank you. We've got about 3.5 to 4 minutes left, so interesting amount of time. Appreciate all the comments in the chat again, and once we go back to the main session, we'll reshare WDFW and DNR's email, so if you have additional questions that you want to send directly to them, you are able to do so. And we also have a survey out, which asks similar question, but goes a bit into more detail. So we do, if you haven't already, we'll send those links out in the main session as well. You can complete that survey.
This is Scott. Can I have another comment?
Yeah, maybe I'll, does anyone who hasn't spoken have a final thought? And then definitely give you the mic, Scott, but maybe I'll wait 15
Sure.
seconds.
Sure. I have an hour of speech I could give. But...
Okay, doing my counting. All right, Scott, mic's to you, virtual mic.
Okay, yeah, I just want to say I agree there's risk. And how far could we take that? Could we have somebody at every trailhead making sure that you have enough water, you have the proper hiking gear, you have a way to contact civilization if you get injured? When you're on trails out in the wilderness, there is a risk, be it from wildlife, other hikers, bikers, whatever. And that's just a risk that most of us are willing to take on to do what we enjoy doing. Nobody wants to go out there and scare people because they're going too fast. But, you know, mountain biking for a lot of us is a high speed, adrenaline fueled thing. I think Strava, if we want to really make things safe, let's get rid of Strava, because people are always trying to be king of the mountain and whatever. I just think that a pedal bike with a motor assist, I weigh 170, my bike's 48. I'm doing a lot less damage than a guy that's 190, you know, with a 30-pound bike that doesn't know how to ride, and he's scratching on the brakes more often. We just have to allow as many people as we can to get out and enjoy DNR lands. And I think the more and more mountain bikes are the biggest selling part of the biking industry right now. So I think we need to come up with a way to use them and make it safe for everybody and get more people out to enjoy the wilderness.
Thank you. And I see, Ken, you were able to type in the chat. I'm glad. I'm sorry the audio isn't working for you today. And all right, you all should have received a pop-up. The breakout rooms will naturally close in about 50 seconds. So you'll get transported. You don't have to click anything to do so, but you can also click leave breakout room and it'll take you to the main session. Appreciate all the feedback.
Thank you.
Right now. So if folks don't feel comfortable being recorded, please go ahead and just keep your video off. We will also ask that unless you are speaking, please remain on mute in order to help our conversation move smoothly and prevent any audio feedback issues. Again, we only have about 45 minutes, so we ask that if you would like to participate, please raise your hand and I'll do my best to spot it quickly and call on you in the order that you raise it. If you're calling phone only and you'd like to unmute, please press *9. Try to raise your hand first though, please, and unmute. We've experienced some difficulties in the past with folks being double muted on a smartphone type situation. So if *9 doesn't appear to be working, you might try clicking unmute on your phone and then *9 just to avoid a double muting situation. One final reminder here to just continue to adhere to the meeting ground rules that we all do earlier. So take space, make space, speak to your own experience by using I statements and respecting each other's points of view. And with that, I'll go ahead and ask Lauren, and I do see a couple hands raised here. That's great. I'll call on you in just a moment. Lauren, first, I'll go ahead and ask you to share your screen, please. And I see it is, there we go, beautiful. So here are our questions. Hopefully folks are able to see that okay. I will also go ahead and post them in our chat so that people can see them. For those of you on the phone, we have the first question is, under what circumstances, if any, should e-bikes be allowed on non-motorized trails and closed roads on land managed by DNR and WDFW? Second, which of the three classes may be allowable, if any or all? And third, just speaking to what opportunities, challenges, or concerns you would like to be considered regarding e-bike use on non-motorized trails and closed roads on lands managed by DNR and WDFW. So it's a lot to think over. No need to be linear about this, but do please raise your hand and I'll go ahead and begin calling on folks. So I see Robert Beach. I'll go ahead and ask you to unmute, then I'll call on Sue and then Troy. Robert, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Sound loud and clear.
I'm sorry, I may be off track here. So I wasn't sure if the breakout rooms were going to talk about different subjects. So I just figured out they're all going to break out. They're all broken out to cover the same three questions.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. So yeah, I just have some feedback, thoughts, because I have a Class 1E mountain bike, and so I have some good experiences and some good real world examples to share. So I don't know if you want me to talk about that now or later in a question and answer type session.
Sure, thanks for clarifying, Robert. I think definitely your input is valuable. I think for the purposes of this breakout room, just because our time is limited, if you wanted to go ahead and enter your experience into the chat, we can make sure that it does get recorded. But for right now, I think we're trying to focus on just receiving input to these 3 questions up on your screen.
Okay, so I can give feedback or answers now.
Sure, if you'd like to provide an answer to, let's say, number 1, we do ask that we try to keep it focused, but then if anyone has any questions or feedback that may not fall under under any of these 3 questions, please just enter it into the chat box.
Gotcha. Okay, well, question 1 for me, because I have a class 1 bike, I have knowledge of the other class 2, class 3 bikes. I feel that class 1 e-bikes should be allowed to be used on trails that allow regular bikes.
Great, thank you very much. All right, Robert, I think I'm going to move the ball along, get through some other folks, but if anything else arises to you, please put it in the chat, and then feel free to raise your hand again if you'd like. Sue.
So you want to take my hand down?
Oh, please take your hand down. Yes, thank you.
Hi, so I'm here in Long Beach and we have the Discovery Trail, which is a paved, wonderful trail. As a senior citizen who is trying to get more fit again, the assistance of an e-bike has been very beneficial. We do have an additional issue with having e-bike rentals here. And so we don't have necessarily the same level of expertise and responsibility on some of those people. And so I would consider that perhaps putting a governor or a class 1 only on the rental bikes might be a good idea. When the kids get on them and they go on full motorcycle mode, they get a little crazy. We've had no real major issues on the trail, no more than somebody who's really proficient at a 10-speed bike and whipping along on the trail. So I'd like to see them get to continue, certainly no class 3s, but perhaps only the class 2s with some certification process. I don't know how any of this would be enforced though.
Great, thank you, Sue. So I'm hearing some concerns about trail etiquette, specifically when it comes to renters of e-bikes in certain areas. So I think Lauren's been able to get that down. Thank you so much, Sue. All right, so I see Troy up next, then John, Brett, Jim, and Mark. Troy, go ahead.
Oh, hi, thank you. First off, yes, I do think that e-bikes class 1 and class 2 should be allowed on the non-motorized trails, without a doubt. Class 3 is a whole nother situation, in my opinion. They can go up to 28, but they can also go faster than that. So class 3, I would say, probably not. But the one thing I really wanted to clarify was on the class 2 and throttles. A throttle, I have a lot of experience with class 1 and class 2 bikes. I own several of them. And I think what people that have never ridden an e-bike, they think a throttle is kind of like a motorcycle throttle, where you just throttle and all of a sudden you have this massive power happening. And that's really not the case at all on class 2 bikes. The throttle is a very gradual increase. It's not like you can't spin the tires like you can on a motorcycle, so to speak. And a throttle is really a safety device. And what I mean by that is if you're starting from a dead stop, using your throttle, it's a lot easier to propel someone, especially people that are older and less experienced on bikes. And it's also a safety device because it allows you to control your speed a lot more. So when you're encountering people on the trail and you're coming behind them, you announce your presence, somebody walking, I'm talking about. If you're in a pedal assist level, and let's just say it's the middle pedal assist level, when you're riding in a pedal assist level, it's going to push you to whatever speed you're at. So if the middle pedal assist level lets you go to 12 miles an hour, let's just say, it's going to want you to go 12 miles an hour anytime you're pedaling. With a throttle, as you're encountering people on the trail, you can stop pedaling and then just feather your throttle so you can go 4, 5, 6, 7 miles per hour very easily, as opposed to pedaling, which is going to push you to a faster speed. So actually throttles are a very, like I said, a safety issue. And it's a safety, it's a big help for safety actually. So I just want to make sure that a lot of people that have not ridden an e-bike have this throttle thoughts in their mind that they're really dangerous, and they're not. They're very, very mild as far as the acceleration that it actually gives you when you're using the throttle. So I would very much be in favor of the use of throttles, not only for the pedestrian safety, but for the safety of the riders too, because throttles will keep your momentum up when you stopped pedaling. So that's a very important thing to, if anybody has not ridden an e-bike, they should really get on one and get on one with the throttle so they can see what I'm talking about. That's pretty much what I wanted to say for now.
Great, thank you for that input, Troy. It's always important to have firsthand experience in these types of forums, and I think we have been able to capture that as a consideration from this breakout group. So thank you very much. All right, so next I see John Traeger. Go ahead, John.
Okay, can everybody hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay, yeah, I've been around the trail access thing with bicycles since mountain bikes came out in the 80s. This is an interesting new sort of evolution of it, but it's not really that different from before. My opinion on this is that, class 1 bikes should be allowed anywhere bicycles are currently allowed. And then class 2 and 3 should be only on roads. It could be closed roads, but they shouldn't be on single track. Mostly because especially class 3, there is a speed difference. Is much more noticeable on single track trails.
Great, thank you, John. So I'm hearing class 1 where regular bikes are allowed, and then classes 2 and 3 more allocated to the closed road areas.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thank you very much. All right, Brett.
1 2 1 2 1 2.
Sounds great.
Thank you. Hi, Brett Andrich. I'm from Anacortes, and I have been a mountain bike rider for over 40 years. And due to health issues in the last couple of years, I've switched to e-mountain bikes. I have spent since last September working extensively with our local forest land management here in Anacortes to gain access for e-mountain bikes on single track in our local area. And as a result of that, I've done extensive research. I've spoken with people from Colorado, Oregon, California, and I've kind of immersed myself in this subject. I'm a big advocate for class 1 e-bikes having equal access to non-motorized trails and single track that is currently enjoyed by analog or traditional bikes. I am not a proponent for class 2 or class 3 bikes. I strongly believe that class 1 bikes offer no different impacts for the environment or other user groups from traditional bikes. So I'm glad to be involved in this process. I appreciate the time that is being given to us, and I look forward to working together with different agencies to provide more public input. One of the most important things I think that needs to be considered is there is a very solid and good delineation in our existing system with regards to the ADA and the fact that if you have an ADA placard that you are granted access. That's a great system for the disabled. I think where one of the things that we need to give consideration to are the less able who may not necessarily fall within those very restrictive categories of what is required to receive an ADA permit. I can I do not qualify for an ADA permit. However, after a couple of heart attacks and a severely reduced ability to get out and enjoy my passion, I've had to use these bikes to be able to do so. And I know that there are many people such as myself who may not necessarily fit within that disabled category, but are certainly within a large category that can be considered as less abled, that do need and should be granted access. Thank you.
Thanks, Brett. So I'm hearing consideration for less abled folks who may not fall within the requirements of an ADA category there.
Thank you.
Great, thanks, Brett. All right, next we have Jim Collins. Jim?
Yeah, so I have a class 1, class 3 e-bikes. I also have a analog mountain bike and road bike. So yeah, I do think that the class 1 bike should be allowed anywhere bikes are otherwise allowed. I think class 3 should be allowed where definitely on roads. My own experience would be whether you have an e-bike or not an e-bike, you can be obnoxious on the trail. So when you have mixed use trails, usually if you go anything more than 10 miles an hour, you can be dangerous around anybody around you. So that's my comment there. It doesn't matter what kind of bike you got, you can be obnoxious. So to me, the class 3 is a bit impractical to ride on mountain bikes, trails, because they're really not set up that way. They're set up like a road bike. So I think class 1 and class 2 would definitely be allowed anywhere, and class 3 definitely for roads. And again, I think it's impractical for them to be on trails, so it's almost a viewpoint. And then any concerns, I mean, I would echo the concerns of anybody that hasn't ridden an e-bike. They get this concept it's like a motorcycle, and it's definitely not. So I think we pretty much have the same wear and tear on the trail that any other rider has. And probably echo the last caller that, yeah, as you get older, you don't qualify for a handicap sticker, but you sure could use, I mean, the pedal assist does definitely help, especially on vertical type trails.
Great, thanks, Jim. Next we have Mark Lund. Mark, go ahead. Mark, it looks like you're still on mute.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. I think I'm going to echo pretty much what Jim said. I'm a 40+ year mountain bike rider. I ride a class 1 mountain bike, a class 3 road bike. I have analog bikes. I'm of the opinion that class 1 bikes should be allowed access anywhere other bikes are allowed to ride. Class 3, I think, should be reserved for road, either paved or unpaved road conditions. And again, yeah, I guess that's the bottom line for me.
Great, thank you, Mark. Next we have Joseph. Is that Joseph Rager?
Hi, can you hear me?
Great.
Okay, great. Hi, my name is J.R. Rager, and I would agree with most of the sentiment with the groups here. I would add that, you know, I'm a certified trail builder for both the Forest Service and the DNR, so I have a little bit different perspective on some of the trail impacts of the of e-bikes in our trail systems. I would state that I agree that in general, class 1 e-bikes belong and in pair with analog bikes, and anywhere an analog bike would be allowed, with the caveat that there are some ecosystems and trail soil types that are impacted more by e-bikes on steep climbs and sandy soils, or soils that would be that are loose in nature, tend to have a higher level of impact from e-bikes as far as when it comes to trail maintenance and impact to the actual trail tread. So a little bit different perspective there, but I think in general, I agree that class 1 e-bikes do belong on in most most trails that any analog trail bike would belong on. And probably I would say for class 2 bikes that would maybe be an ADA requirement where somebody's unable to pedal. If they have an ADA requirement that a throttle within the class 2 may be appropriate. Class 3s really I don't believe are appropriate on most non-motorized trails.
Great, thank you, JR. I'm hearing maybe a consideration of soil type and ecosystem for the impact of an e-bike as well. All right, next we have Daniel Gray. Go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah, thank you. So you can probably see my moniker. I ride dirt bikes. I build trail all the time. I live in the Columbia River Gorge where mountain biking and dirt bike riding is a way of life. I want to reiterate what one of the gentlemen said, that the throttle is not what I think some of these people think it is. The throttle does not give you the opportunity to do burnouts on the trail and tear the trails up. The throttle gives you that safety and control, like the gentleman said. I ride with tons of people that have type 1 and type 2. We ride together, and there is absolutely no difference in the speed we go or our impact on the trails. I would like to see type 1 and 2 allowed on all gated gravel roads. I don't see a reason that any of those bikes should be banned from gated roads, gravel roads, places that have been logged, all torn up from logging, and then you're gonna, and then the idea like, oh, you can't ride a bike in there, but hey, we're gonna log it again in 10 years. And then the major problem that nobody's mentioned yet is the problem that e-bikes present in trails where people are riding uphill now, where they predominantly would always ride downhill. So the major problem in the gorge is that you got these guys bombing 30 miles an hour down a single track, and for 30 years nobody was ever riding up that trail, and now you got the e-bike guys and gals cruising right up the trail, no problem. So I think a solution would be like some signage or expectation that the e-bike guys aren't riding up the steep gnarly that people are flying down. And this, I work closely with the Hood River crew, and I don't know if any people ride out here, but there's multiple crews out here that do trail work all the time. And this is the number one problem, is the people riding their e-bikes up the trails that they probably shouldn't be. Yeah, so please allow type 1 and type 2 on all trails that allow bicycles, and definitely gated gravel roads. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel. And just one point of clarification. When you say, what do you mean when you say gated gravel road specifically?
So out here in the gorge, DNR gates gravel roads, so like old logging roads. And those are mostly used by like hunters and just mountain bike riders that just want to get out and get away from people, mushroom hunters. And so we get a lot of gated roads. And the idea that we can't ride an e-bike behind a gated road seems silly to me, but I'm sure other people disagree.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Daniel. All right, next we have Jackie Smith.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Can hear you great.
Great. Hey, I live on Whidbey Island, where we have tons and tons of mountain biking trails, and it's a fairly new hobby for me. I'm 56 years old and had a sedentary desk job for 35 years, and this is an activity that gets me out and about. So for everyone who's talked about us senior citizens, which technically I am, I guess, I think it's fantastic how bikes and e-bikes are really getting a lot more people out biking. That said, I want to echo what a lot of other people have said. There's some issues with the bike type, and there's issues with the trail type. I bomb down a lot of trails downhill, as Daniel Gray was just saying. And I think if it's single track and you don't have good visibility, I would be a little wary of allowing certain types of e-bikes on those. They're even kind of dangerous for traditional mountain bikes, quite honestly. But when you have people wanting to go both directions, yeah, it's a recipe for some smash ups if there's not good visibility. So I think we need to keep the trail in mind. If it's like, I think you mentioned that Oregon is allowing e-bikes on 8-foot wide trails, and I can kind of see why they probably do that, because that gives you room to maneuver. So that would be my one thing to point out there. And then again, I just want to echo, like, as an older person, there are plenty of times where I want that assist on a really long incline or a steep uphill grade, and I would love to have that assist. So I've been looking at e-bikes a lot. A lot of the trails here are mixed use, and so the last point I want to make is that we're sharing them with hikers and with horses. So I think that the bike should be quiet and shouldn't be able to go, too fast so that a person can't have control. And this is where my inexperience with e-bikes comes in, is I don't know if they're quiet or if they're noisy. I'd love to hear from this group if they are or not.
Great, thank you, Jackie. And if anyone in this breakout group, which I assume there are many, have experience with e-bikes and want to maybe write in the chat the noise experience of riding an e-bike and hiking around e-bikes, that would be great. Thanks very much. All right, next we have Vern Boyles. Take it away, Vern.
Hey there, thanks a lot for having me. And I would just say that even with hearing aids in both ears, my Class 1 e-bike is very quiet.
Okay, thanks, Vern.
You're welcome. My proposal would be much the same as we've heard many times, that Class 1 e-bikes be allowed wherever there are mountain bikes allowed. I would add one thing, that if for some reason there was a controversy on a particular trail, I certainly wouldn't want to have acoustic regular mountain bikes lose access to that trail. I can't imagine what that circumstance would be, but my goal is more mountain bike trails for everyone. I'm a relatively newcomer to mountain biking. I think with this group, just only around 25 years or so. And I've been riding Class 1 since 2019, sorry. All over Canada. I just got back from a week in Italy. Class 1 e-bikes go everywhere in both those places, in British Columbia and in Italy. I think it's a great innovation. It allows people to continue on. I also moved into the e-bike world because of a heart problem, which I have since worked out of and don't have anymore because of e-bike access. So anyway, I think that's it. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Next, I see Sue Beal, and I do see a number of folks that have already spoken that have their hands up, which is fine. But if that's a relic from a past raised hand, I'll ask that please go ahead and put your hand down if you don't want to speak again. In the meantime, Sue, go ahead.
Hi, so I am a horse rider and the president of Capital Riders in Olympia. So we ride a lot on Capitol Forest. And the quietness of the e-bikes has been a problem because they just kind of show up and spook the horses. So often it's better if the bikes have a bell on it, because then horses can tell that they're coming. When having e-bikes on the trail gives them more of an opportunity to go uphill faster, which horses just don't expect that kind of thing coming up behind them or in front of them on an uphill trail. So I think wider trails, having e-bikes possibly on logging roads would be okay, but I think that e-bikes should not be on non-motorized trails that have equestrians on. Also, there are many more hikers and bikers on the trail that equines share, and having more e-bikes is just another obstacle for them to try to maneuver. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Sue. All right, let's see. Next, I see Tyler Foreman.
Yeah, thanks.
I'm also a owner of a class one e-bike as well as traditional bikes. I would echo a lot of what has already been said, especially the people who are just less able due to injuries, things like that. I can very much relate to not being able to keep up with some of my younger friends when they're going out on rides. I've got kids, I can't get out as much and stay in shape as well as I used to be able to. So there's times when the e-bike is a better tool for me than my traditional bike. I put this in the chat, but I wanted to just clarify something somebody said earlier about pedal assist bikes kind of wanting you to go the speed that they're set at. And I don't know where that comes from. A class one e-bike is just like a pedal bike in the sense that if you slow down your pedal strokes, if you change your gears, your bike will slow down. You can control the speed of it. It's just fine. It's no faster on the descent than a regular bike. So I don't know. I'm not really sure where that comment came from. I do. There definitely are some concerns that I think have been raised. I understand the equestrian use concern. I would say though that e-bikes being a new thing, yes, they may be unexpected, but that's not something that will continue to be unexpected. I think we're all going to adapt to these changing uses on the trail, and it will become just normal for us. We may need to take some steps to better alert each other of our presence, but I don't think it's something that is insurmountable. So yeah, again, class one, I think everywhere regular bike is allowed. I do share Vern's concern though. We would not want to endanger traditional bike use. If there's a trail that it just doesn't make sense to add more bikes, or for whatever reason, we should be able to have that conversation, I think.
Great. Thank you, Tyler. All right, so I think everybody that I see with their hand up has already spoken, so I'm just going to go ahead and start up at the top again. If something comes up and you haven't had a chance to speak and would like to, please go ahead and raise your hand and I'll prioritize you getting your voice in there. All right, starting back at the top, I see Mark Lund.
Sorry, I forgot to lower my hand. I'm good, thank you.
No worries. All right, I see Joseph. And that could be a relic. Joseph, you're on mute.
I had gotten kicked off. I had raised my hand originally and then got kicked off. So sorry.
Oh, no worries.
I'm
Do
rejoined.
you have anything else to add, or are you okay?
I'm okay. Thanks.
Great. Thank you. All right. I see John.
Yeah, I got a couple things listening to everybody. One of them was that kind of came up briefly was user behavior. So this is something we've dealt with the mountain bike community for a long time, is that, it only takes a few people to disappoint everybody. So people climbing up trails that are downhill trails, or doing other things that mountain bikers generally don't do, but may start doing because they're new to the sport entirely. So e-biking has brought in, I think, and will continue to bring in a lot of new users to the sport of, riding trails on a bicycle. And as the sport grows, one of the growing pains we've always had when these surges happen is a whole new, tranche of users that don't know the proper etiquette. And so it does take time for adjustment to happen. And I do a lot of volunteering with Evergreen. We do put up tents at trailheads to try to convince people or educate people, I should say, sorry, proper behavior and answer questions and try to just promote proper trail use. The other thing I had was the sport just is growing, and it's going to create another shortage of trails. We're starting to see it around big population centers. Other parts of the states are pretty quiet still. But I think you're going to see more use because they do have, people can ride farther than they would have from trailheads or gates. So it does change and it kind of disperses people over larger areas. And the last comment was about off-road motorcycles and e-bikes are not really compatible on trails because now you're talking a significant speed difference, and it's really pretty dicey being on an e-bike on a moto trail. So those are my extra comments I had.
Thank you, John. I'm hearing a common theme about the crowding of trails and different uses and how to make sure that all of those different uses are communicating well with one another while on the trail and then other places as well. So thank you. I do want to note that Becky has entered into the chat that the class of bike is much less important than the behavior or attitude of the rider. She rides a class 3 regularly on roads and paved trails around her home. And the issue is with class 2 bike riders who motor on down the trail with no pedaling and seems like they are more out for a mini bike experience. And Becky, I did see your hand up earlier. I'm wondering if there's anything you wanted to add to that.
Thanks for addressing me. Really, no, my bigger issue is just with being a class 3 rider. I think I saw earlier where I do have access to long distance trails, like let's say the John Wayne Trail or the state long distance east to west corridors. But like I said, I personally have experienced a lot of younger riders on what I deem to be class 2 bikes, just motoring right on down trails and roads, no pedaling. And I would agree with one of the women who spoke really early about the Discovery Trail on the north side of the Olympic Square. People using the class 2 bikes either are uneducated about how to use them or lack some common courtesy about how to use them in crowded situations. And I would have serious concerns about allowing class 2 bikes in some of these areas. I'm all for class 1. I understand concerns about not allowing class 3, but I really have strong objections to class 2 on the trails. Thank you.
Thanks, Becky. And I'm hearing your concerns about class 2 on those trails seems to be based on behavior and etiquette over other components.
Correct, absolutely correct.
Great, thank you. All right. Still seems some residual hands, so I'm going to go ahead and continue calling down the line. I see John, you have your hand up? John Traeger, still?
Sorry, got me with my hand up.
No worries, no worries. Troy?
Yes,
Great,
hi.
thank you. Oh, different Troy.
Oh, sorry, Joe Frazen, and then Troy Traeger. I'm calling you next. Troy Frazen, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I wanted to, somebody had mentioned that class 1 and class 2 bikes go the same speed, do the same, have the same impact, and I completely 100% agree with that. Somebody, I know a lady that just spoke said she doesn't like the class 2 bikes because of the throttle. And it's easy not to like the throttle, but as the other person said, and what I agree with them, class 1 and class 2 are exactly the same as far as top speed that you go, acceleration that you go. Just because somebody is not pedaling, that shouldn't be something that we would disallow them to ride on a trail, because they're doing the exact same things the class 1 is doing. I do very much agree with signage. It helps a great deal if trails have signs indicating what you can and can't do, what classes should be there. I find that almost everybody, there's always that 1 or 2 person that doesn't follow the rules, but almost everybody follows the rules if they know what the rules are. So the signage, I think it's very important. I think the less able versus the ADA discussion is spot on. There's a ton of people that have a lot of problems that don't have an ADA placard. And the last thing I wanted to mention was, I'm the one that said about the pedal assist wants to push you to a certain speed. There are 2 different types of sensors on e-bikes. One of them is called a torque sensor, And that's the one where if you slow down pedaling, the bike slows down as well. And a gentleman that talked about that is 100% correct about a torque sensor. There is another sensor out there though that does just go the speed, whatever pedal assist level you're in, you're going to go that speed, and that's called the cadence sensor. So I just wanted to clarify that. He mentioned it in the chat and he mentioned it when he spoke. He is correct about torque sensors. And most class 1 bikes that don't have throttle, obviously they don't have a throttle if they're class 1, but most class 1 bikes have a torque sensor that makes you slow down and speed up depending on how fast you pedal. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Great, thanks, Troy. And would you mind repeating the second kind of sensor that you were talking about?
Yeah, the second call is a cadence sensor.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Great, thanks very much. All right, Troy, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Is it Traeger?
Icebreaker, yeah, it's a tough one.
Go ahead.
Well, just to kind of boil down my comments, what I've seen and as an active mountain bike user and trail builder, and also a bike shop employee, what I've seen in the area is e-bikes have allowed riders of various abilities and health situations to ride and recreate together. It's unquestionably a positive experience. I'll keep my comments limited to class 1 bikes because that is the overwhelming type of mountain bike that we see on our local trails. I think they should be allowed. I'd also like to add that class 1 riders, typically, again, on our local trails and what we've seen, they're active and experienced mountain bike riders. This is not their first mountain bike, and many of them also have analog bikes. So it's not introducing a brand new person to the trail. It's just allowing more people of different abilities and health situations to ride together. The only concern I'd echo what a lot of other people have said is increased signage for both directional trails, and if we do, and as we do see new riders because of e-bikes get out to these trails, knowing where to go and not getting lost, signage is always a good thing, whether it's an e-bike or not.
Great, thank you, Troy. All right, Jim and then Jackie.
Okay, just a couple things. I mean, my observation is on class 1 and class 3 is really the cyclist, the pedal assist, the cyclist, the more experienced will use those. The class 2 definitely has a lot more people that are not used to cycling. It's just been my observation of who I see on the trail and who I see on the road. The other comment, I think it's been brought up, there are a lot of different variations to all these bikes. And I know even with my class 3, there's 2 different motor sizes. And I think the class 3 is getting a little bit of a bad rap that they go fast. Well, again, they're pedal assist. You got to be working to go fast. And I think it's already been said several times in the comments. I mean, the scariest thing is how people go down the trails, which it doesn't matter what bike you have. If you're out of control, it's dangerous for all of us. So I do ride with the bell. So that's one thing I do. Just I heard something going on in the woods. I found another guy with the bell, and I thought, hey, that's not a bad idea. So that's definitely a safety precaution. So people can hear you coming. The more crowded the trails get.
Great, thank you, Jim.
Oh, and I would probably, I don't know, ask Troy. I don't think there's a class 3 mountain bike. So I think those are all hybrid or road bikes. I'd be interested to know.
Troy, any knowledge on whether there's a class 3 mountain bike? And that might have been Troy Franzen, who I'm not seeing. Maybe he got kicked out of the breakout room.
I'll jump in on that one. There are a few coming out, but they're not long travel bikes like the type 1 and 2s. More like just enough to smooth out the road. So that's not really been developed by the industry yet.
I can echo that as well. The vast majority of e-mountain bikes are class 1. There's very few, if I'm not aware of any that are class 3.
Great, thanks everyone. It's great to have a room full of experts here to learn from. We only have a couple more minutes left, so I want to make sure we have time for Jackie. Did you have something to add?
Yeah, two things. First, I originally raised my hand because I wanted to underscore the need for signage. That's been very well documented. So I'm just plus oneing that. The other thing I wanted to talk about was the phrase non-motorized. Some of the debates I've been part of at the trailhead are someone would be saying like, well, my e-bike is allowed here because it's a battery operated one, so it's non-motorized, so therefore I can go. So I think there will also be a part of the education job that is going to have to happen here. Will be like, what does non-motorized actually mean? And I can just also anticipate just human nature. Some people will be like, well, do I have a class 1 or 2 or 3? Maybe if it's that vacation rental situation, or you know, a more casual rider. So so defining those terms really clearly for people will be super helpful.
Great, thank you, Jackie. It's finding it so interesting that a lot of what folks have said today has to do with information dissemination and education about etiquette and signage and making sure that everybody is on the same page with regard to what the rules are. All right, let's see. Is there anyone else here? I know we have quite a few people in this breakout room, and I know we have not heard from everybody. I'm going to go ahead and look through the chat here to see if there's anything I'm sure I missed while y'all were speaking, but if there's anything that anybody would like to add who hasn't spoken yet, I encourage you to do so. Again, there are no wrong answers, no stupid questions, no bad input.
I'd like to make an additional comment if I could.
Go ahead.
Hi, this is J.R. Rager. I know many of my colleagues and such would be very upset for me talking about this subject, but I think it's an important subject to address in the grand scheme of things because it will become a bigger issue as the technology develops and as it develops today. You know, one of the problems that we have, you know, and as I said, I support Class 1 e-bikes on the trails, but one of the challenges, especially with the Class 2 e-bikes, is that the technologies that are coming out now will allow you to hack your bikes. So, and they allow you to change torque curves and it's very proliferate in the area that we ride in, to be able to make it to create torque curve. You can change the torque curves of how the bike engages. You can eliminate the restrictions on speeds. There's a lot of, and as the technology continues to develop, there's more and more of these types of things coming out. So I think it's real important to, you know, from my perspective and my experience, that what we can see happen is that we can see particular user groups maybe start to get a little bit over the handlebars, if you will, on some of these technologies, and which can cause more.
Welcome back, everybody. We're going to take a moment to let people get settled again in the main group, and I'll ask Claire to bring the slide deck back up. So we'll just give folks a moment to get settled, and we'll be get started in just a moment again. Okay. We can go to the next slide, Claire. So just for wrap up, we're going to cover a few things. I think we'll start with a report out actually from the various breakout groups. So actually, Claire, gave you incorrect instructions. I think we can go back to the mural if you have a moment. And we're going to just do a quick report out from each of the 4 facilitators. And I'll go first, and then we'll go to Claire and Lucila. So there are lots of great comments provided in this group, and there are a lot of comments that were put in the chat and a few questions. We're going to review those comments in the chat after this meeting and make sure that we record those as well, but we weren't able to get them all on the screen. So I'll just note that there was a lot of interest in our group. I don't think it was exclusively with everyone, but there was a lot of interest in allowing e-bikes somewhere on public lands. Many folks highlighted the importance or highlighted including class 1 e-bikes on non-motorized trails. Some indicated that e-bikes should have a place to ride, but not on the non-motorized trails, but closed roads, or having e-bike, mountain bike specific trails is important. And then where there was more questions amongst the group that Annalise and I were with was really about if class 2 and 3 should be allowed on trails or closed roads. Some expressed concern about the throttle and the experience of how that changes the experience on the landscape, or where's the difference between an e-bike with a throttle and a motorcycle. So some had concerns about class 2. Others indicated that class 2 might be appropriate because it's still only going 20 miles an hour, and that would be speed would be the bigger concern. And so class 1 and 2 could be considered. And then others highlighted class 1 and 3 because of the concern of the throttle, whereas some were concerned about the speed at which class 3 e-bikes could travel up to 28 miles an hour. And then one, I'm just looking at it here, the bottom right, is some noted that for non-motorized single track trails, going 28 miles an hour is probably not a concern, is what we heard. And that's more of a concern on roads or straight routes where you could actually go that fast. There were lots of opportunities, challenges, concerns, and considerations, and I can't highlight them all or do them justice. But a few that I'll note is safety, of course, was a concern with regard to e-bike use, as well as speed, and those are related. Some others that were brought up was noting that there are industrial regulations about use of chainsaws and other equipment, including electric chainsaws during high fire danger. And there was a question that was asked is, would e-bikes be affected or could they affect fire danger? There were some notes about research that's being done elsewhere, pilot programs, and I think I'll leave it at that. Annalise, would you like to add anything from our group?
No, I think we heard a number of times just about multi-use trails and safety concerns around particularly horseback riders. I think there are a number of folks who are part of horseback riding communities or have shared trails with horses before. So we heard that a few times as well.
Thank you. Claire, we can go to your group next.
Thanks, Thomas. I'll scroll over. So some highlights from our group. The importance of education and user etiquette was a topic amongst our participants. We had some folks say that e-bikes allow them to keep up with their friends, especially if they have disabilities or accessibility issues. We had some folks say only on motorized trails because of trail wear, although we did have a couple of people share different studies and reports about the impacts of e-bikes versus analog bikes or normal mountain bikes on trail use. A couple of people voiced interest in having clear and reasonable expectations to eliminate or reduce problems between user groups. And we also had that e-bike should be allowed under all circumstances. We had a lot of support for class 1 e-bikes on all types of trails where bikes are currently allowed, and some concerns about class 2 and class 3. We did also have some support that people should be able to use any of the e-bikes on whichever trails bikes are currently allowed, if that is their choice of whichever class they choose. And we had a good discussion about how important they are for accessibility, that it is ableist to not allow e-bikes. We also had some concerns about controlling access and enforcement of the use of e-bikes. Some discussions about the harms of stereotyping individual user groups based on individual behavior, and interest in the environmental impacts of e-bikes on trails. and also some concerns about different user groups as well as horseback riders. So just interaction between different kinds of recreationalists as well as safety and speed. But we had users from all different types of recreation groups represented. So Cheryl, anything to add?
Find my mute button and maybe my camera button too. That seems like the most of it. We did have, if you slide over to the right a little bit, we had a little bit of a conversation about opportunities for education. We talked about guidance at the trail access points that help different user groups know what the expectations on the trail are. We also talked about having information available to people at the point of purchase of bicycles so they can choose the right bike class that know what trails they'd be able to use and which ones they wouldn't when they choose to purchase their bike. And that might help having people choose a bike that's appropriate for the uses that they want to have.
Thanks.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Cheryl, can we go to Lucila? And then I want to make sure we get to Alyssa's group as well, just within the time we have. So thank you both.
Great. I'll try to be brief. A lot of the folks in my room echoed some of the things that were said in Thomas and Claire's group. So I'll highlight that a thread throughout a lot of the commenters was just the benefits and how e-bikes expand access to aging populations and folks with disabilities. So that was a common thread. There was an importance of respect and respect on trails and trail etiquette. Some highlights that signs are a useful tool for that. We went into the discussion of which of the three classes, and there was somewhat support for all classes, especially on the closed roads, yet with non-motorized trails, there was a bit more discussion there. And speed was a concern. Trail disruption was a concern, yet there was differing opinions there of some folks saying that e-bikes actually don't damage trails as much as folks think. And that for speeds as well, similar to in your room, Thomas, that the amount of times folks get up to 28 miles per hour is rare out on the mountain. I'll also note that, there's some confusion around the classifications of the e-bikes. So suggestions for making those descriptions simpler. So tying it to that education piece. Some other concerns were around enforcement and comments on communities being able and having being empowered to regulate, and kind of that coming back to that trail etiquette, and kind of closed off the conversation going back to the values. If access is one of the main values for DNR and WDFW, how do we keep that in mind with other values that are important to people?
Thanks, Lucila. Should we go to Alyssa, your group?
And in the interest of time, I'll be quick here. Our group, this is group 4, echoed a lot of the same concerns and same points as groups 1, 2, and 3. But in some, there were a lot of folks that mentioned that class 1 bikes should be allowable where mountain bikes are allowable. Class 3, generally that they should not be allowable. However, there are multiple opinions on the allowability of class 2 e-bikes. There was one mention that folks that tend to get class 2 e-bikes may be occasionally less experienced than folks that are riding class 1 and class 3 e-bikes, which brought us to an overarching theme of etiquette and behavior of individuals riding e-bikes on these trails. Communications between different user groups, so alerting one another on trails, on blind curves, when coming up behind, and that also links to increasing information dissemination amongst e-bike riders and different users of these trails generally. Clarification on definitions, so clarification on the function of the throttle, what maybe some people see that there is a throttle function on certain types of e-bikes, and what does that actually mean for the trail experience? What does motorized versus non-motorized actually mean in practice? And then how to accommodate multiple uses on these trails. There was mention that wider trails increase visibility, which is good for accommodating multiple uses. And then lastly, just considerations for users with ADA needs, but then also those individuals who maybe don't qualify for an ADA placard, but maybe less able to be able to still use those roads with e-bikes as needed. Let's see, Lauren, is there anything that you'd like to highlight that I may have missed here?
No, I think you covered it. Thanks, Alyssa.
Okay. Thank you all for providing this information and the dialogue and input today. Claire, if we could go back to the slides, I'm just going to cover a few next steps. One, if you go to the next slide, there's another public town hall just like this one scheduled for 5:30 p.m. next Wednesday. We can go to the next slide. In an effort to try and make the town halls as accessible to as many as possible, that's at town hall after work hours. So tell your friends or come back and join for more. Also, in response to a question that I saw in the chat, there will be a summary report from that mural whiteboard. So we're going to clean it up a little bit and we're going to post that online after the agencies have reviewed for public review and for your information to ensure this process is transparent. Also, the recording of this meeting, including the recordings of all 4 breakout groups, will be posted online. And more information about e-bikes as well as the public process is also available on DNR and DFW's website. And my colleague Lucila will post a link to those websites shortly. Next slide, please. Again, I want to highlight, we also have this public survey. There's a Spanish and English version on the DNR and DFW website. So please feel free to share this survey with your friends, with your colleagues, with your recreation partners. We want to try and get as much input as possible. And if you haven't filled it out, please do so. It is open until July 15th. And the link I can see is in the chat to both the Spanish and English survey. And then again, if you have comments or questions that we didn't get to today, please feel free to email those to either wildthings@dfw.wa.gov or recreation@dnr.wa.gov, and we'll put those in the chat as well for follow-up, including, we'll include the Triangle team's emails as well if you have questions about other opportunities to engage in this process. So lastly, just really want to thank you for participating today, for the input. And the last thing we'll just ask you to do, if you can, is fill out just a quick poll sharing with you how satisfied you are with this meeting today, and that will help us adjust for the future. So thank you for being here. I'll ask Claire to launch that poll in just a moment, and you're free to go once you're done filling out that poll, so thank you.